Well, hi everybody. Welcome to Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, and yet another effortless, painless, completely smooth, and professional segue into the world of political commentary. I know, I know that you know as well as I do that this show has won many awards for excellence, especially in the technical department. So I'm just going to put a little note up there saying, refresh your browsers if you didn't get to see it, and then we'll start the actual show like a show when we'll do the show. I just want to make sure people know what's going on here. So there's a reason for this. It's not a good reason. Boom. Okay. We're rolling. We're recording. We got sound. Everything looks good. So all of this effortlessness on the part of your technical director, who's been sacked, by the way, and the audio engineer, who's also been sacked, is because I was using the Meteor mic here for many, 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 many shows, and I decided to go back to the Yeti mic for right angle, and it's got a much better sound, and I will say this about Ustream. It is miraculous, and it's been a long time since I've had any on-air complaints about Ustream, but it's not terribly user-friendly. It just, you'd think it would recognize the new microphone, but it didn't. I recognized the new microphone. It was sitting on the table there. I said, look, that's the old microphone. Here's the new microphone. Let's plug the old microphone in. I recognize it. It's a microphone. And anyway, here we are. Some things just shouldn't change, you know. Sometimes you upgrade something, make it work better. You hate it. It doesn't work as well. But, however, you'll be pleased to know that we have 100 amazing questions tonight, and we're going to take a bunch of them in the Stratosphere Lounge episode 130. Now, I think I said last week that was episode 130, and I was corrected. So the person who's in charge of numbering episodes has been sacked, and the person supervising the sacking of personnel here has also been sacked. So we're ready to go, but we'll do a little walk around the block first here, kids, as usual. You know, if you just want to talk about the political scene and what's going on out there, I knew this was going to be goat rodeo, this election, and I knew that it was going to be pretty much the wild, wild west, but I didn't have any idea at all that this election was going to be like this dramatic. I thought all the drama was going to be on the Trump side. I really did. I thought that all the drama was going to be on the Trump side, and that Hillary would just basically maintain her very lifelike motions and gestures, and then we'd see whether Donald Trump could outperform her in the debates and so on. The idea that Hillary Clinton might be so deathly ill that she may not make it to the election, she just may drop. It's what do you say? What do you say when the Democratic Party's presidential nominee appears to have extremely severe neurological damage, and as I'm writing right now, in the very moment, my next firewall. We know from people who've watched the show, who've been around for a while, that I take a particular pride in destroying conspiracy theories. It's my favorite thing to do. I love to destroy conspiracy theories because it's a great way to maintain your mind for more useful duties. And as always, the great thing to do with a conspiracy theory of any kind is just assume it's true. Tell them what they tell you what they think happened. Assume it's true, and then work it out and see if it flies. And it almost never does. Almost never, but not always never, because so. Conspiracy is a word I use very lightly, but I think there's just incontrovertible evidence of a pretty massive conspiracy to get Hillary Clinton elected. When I say massive, I don't mean millions of people, and it doesn't require, hundreds of thousands of people, putting poisonous chemicals in jets, and it doesn't require drones flying into the World Trade Center, none of that. It just requires a few key people who are all on the same page politically, agreeing to ignore the little truth in order to get to the big truth, which is we got to get our socialist paradise in here, and anything we have to do to get the socialist paradise in here is worth it, because once they completely get power, then humanity will be out in the sunshine for 1,000,000 years. We've seen how that worked before. So here's what I mean. let's just assume this premise is true, and I don't know how there's any way to deny it, and I'll put those pieces together in the video. But frankly, there are so many pieces of video evidence that Hillary Clinton is very, very sick, neurological damage, severe neurological damage, that it's obvious to me that a number of people must know this. It's not allergies, and it's not pneumonia, and it's not the flu. She's got serious issues. She's been falling down. Actually, I've heard since the 1990s, certainly since 2005. She just keeps falling down, dehydrated. Well, okay, so you're dehydrated, you fall down, hit the ground a couple times. I would think that after that, after your first episode, certainly after your second episode, you might want to hydrate yourself a little better. It's none of these things, and we know it. We know it. It's much more serious than that. And so realistically, who would have to know in order to pull this off? Well, we already know that CNN, because we've seen it. We've seen it with our own lying eyes. CNN will interview somebody, and the moment that it starts to get negative about Hillary, they will not just usher the guest off, and they won't play the walk-off music. It's not like da-da-da-da-da, well, thank you. They will cut to black. They will cut the feed. And so you've got to ask yourself, since I've seen it 3 or 4 times, and since you probably have too, there is a producer at CNN who's giving orders to the people at CNN. You don't need the whole staff involved. And it's not a conspiracy in the way that you and I would think of a conspiracy, because it's not a bunch of people trying to get somebody murdered and do something awful. It's a bunch of people trying to do something that they perceive to be good, especially with Donald Trump as the opposition. And so you basically, if CNN is cutting the feed to people who are criticizing Hillary on air, then you have absolute, incontrovertible visual and video evidence that CNN is on some level pulling very hard for Hillary Clinton, and that's not my imagination. And so that part of the conspiracy has some evidence for it. See, it all comes down to evidence. That's what it comes down to. What's the evidence? And how does the evidence of the conspiracy outweigh the evidence of reality? So clearly the press is on their side. We know that if Hillary is as sick as I think, and as I think everybody thinks, then we know that Hillary knows how sick she is. We know that Bill knows how sick she is. We know that Chelsea knows how sick she is. We know that Uma Aberdeen knows how sick she is. We know that the entire White House staff knows how sick she is. We know that the Secret Service detail that accompanies her everywhere knows how sick she is. We know that that the Democratic National Committee on some level knows how sick she is, because one of the first symptoms of this illness was an absolute mystery to us. It was about a little around a year ago, when the debate started, and Hillary Clinton is debating Bernie Sanders and various assorted other nobodies. And the next thing you know, they cut to commercial, and when they cut back to commercial, she's not there. She's gone. She's just gone. And many people, not unreasonably, asked, well, since we're back on live on the debate, and it's supposed to be Hillary debating Bernie, and only Bernie is here, it seems like something might be amiss. And it was amiss. Hillary, needless to say, had to come up with a cute cover story. So she came up with the perfect cover story, because it's believable enough if you don't have any other evidence. Plus, it gets a dig in on your special brand, which is being a woman. By the way, I didn't mean to alarm anybody. Hillary Clinton, as you may not know, is making the fact that she's a woman and might be the first woman president somewhat central to her campaign. So she comes out and says, essentially, well, I came back late because it's a longer walk to the women's room. And she gets kind of cheers about this. Oh, hey, Hillary, she walked longer to the women's room, and she's showing it to these guys. I thought at the time, I thought it was just a form of stagecraft, and rather good stagecraft. Everybody who knows anything about public speaking will tell you that there's nothing more effective than keeping people waiting. And that's a fine line, because if you keep people waiting a little bit, they get more and more excited. But if you keep them waiting too long, they start getting angry. In any event, she comes out, and nobody asked any questions, and okay. But we were hearing evidence from multiple sources that the reason she didn't come out was because she was confused and dazed and didn't know where she was. Now, unfortunately for Hillary, we have emails from Uma Aberdeen saying she's easily confused, and so there's evidence for that. So clearly, clearly, the FBI, the FBI director, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, once the most respected law enforcement agency in the world, now just another political hack job. The director of the FBI comes out and gives an hour worth of evidence showing why she's guilty, and then says, we're not going to bring charges. Somebody pointed out that the bar, you have to clear to prosecute a celebrity. It doesn't have to be a politician, but especially a politician, huge national level politician like Hillary. They say that the bar to prosecute a celebrity is much higher than it is just for a normal person, because if you fail to get the prosecution, your reputation is destroyed as a prosecutor, and the image of your agency is tarred, and plus there's probably going to be some kind of revenge of some kind. So look, it's really bad, folks. I mean, I don't want to sound like a nut here, and I've been shooting down nuts as long as I can remember. But this is evidence. There's just evidence of all of this. People have speculated, is it Parkinson's? Other people have said, well, maybe it's not that. Maybe it's ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. Maybe it's just a blood clot. But she is neurologically ill. Her bizarre reactions to being asked startling questions, and at the balloon drop at the DNC. When the balloons came down at the Democratic National Convention, Hillary Clinton looked as if pixies and fairies were flying down. I mean, it's the look she had. It's not the first time they've ever ended a political convention with a balloon drop. There's not a political convention in the last 50 years that hasn't had a balloon drop. And so all of this together just telling me she's very, very sick, and many people know it. Here's the point, right? Here's the point. What difference does it make at this point? What difference does it make? Well, here's your answer, folks. Hillary Clinton plus the DNC plus CNN and a lot of the news media and plus all the rest of them don't think that the fact that she's ill, maybe critically ill, is any of your business. You're just a citizen, and your job is to go out and work and pay taxes so they can spend your money. They think that her being critically ill is none of your business. And back in the old days when we had a republic here, we used to say, well, we'll give the people the information, and then the people can decide whether or not it's of importance. And by the way, as always with these types of people, it's all about, first reaction is the knee-jerk lie, and then, as I just pointed out in the Clinton lie ratchet, it's a series of lies that get progressively more damaging as more and more evidence comes out. You never just go to the truth. You certainly would never start with the truth, right? Because, my God, if she started with the truth, she wouldn't be a Clinton. But you have to ask yourself, if these people are as smart as they think they are, and they're not, then you would realize that if Hillary had a serious disease, let's say she had Lou Gehrig's disease, or Parkinson's, let's just say, I'm not saying she has that, I'm just saying let's say she did. And Hillary Clinton had come out at the beginning of the campaign in a really nice campaign ad, sitting by a fireplace and all the rest of this stuff, and basically turned to the camera and said, my fellow Americans, I feel that the changes we need to make in this country to continue our blah, 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 our progressive vision, blah, 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 are so important that I'm going to run for the presidency despite the fact that I have Parkinson's disease. And I only realized it just a few years ago, and needless to say, my loved ones and I, Bill and Chelsea and I, sat and spent many, many, many long nights arguing about whether or not I should drop out of the race, and we decided that for the good of the country, and despite the danger to my personal health, we decided that at a time as critical as this, that I should just go ahead and run for president. And then I would just give a paragraph. Then I just give a paragraph about the disease. It progresses, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't seem to be. I give them a paragraph. And then I just get out of there. And then all of this stuff that's fueling this constant, perpetual, automatic, knee-jerk lying goes away because you don't have to lie anymore. And you get an enormous, enormous, enormous boost of sympathy because the American people are very kind people. They're very kind people. Somebody comes out and gives them the truth, they react very positively, but she just can't do it. So if she's not going to lie about things as important as whether or not the President of the United States is going to live long enough to get to the inauguration, I think that's something I have a right to know as a voter. And if it turns out that the press decides that you have no business knowing that, the press and the Democrats decide that you have no business knowing that the person who's going to be president has a potentially fatal neurological condition that causes her to freeze up and lock up and basically just go into vapor lock mode when there's signs of tension or crisis, which occasionally happens when you're president of the United States. Every now and then on President of the United States Day, something rather important happens. And we'd like to think that if there's some kind of an emergency, that the president wouldn't just go into vapor lock and have to be carried off the stage. So what do we know? We know that the Democrats and the Democratic National Committee, in collusion with the news media in a general way, have decided that Donald Trump is such a threat to them and that Hillary Clinton has been their candidate for 30 years. You understand? This is the thing. See, this is why so many people have such a hard time letting it go. She showed up on the scene in 1992, so 2002, 2012, so 25 years. She's been a strong woman, and she's been the woman who's going to be, going to show all the boys that she can handle it. And so there are people who have 25 years of investment in her emotionally. Forget people who worked on the campaign. 25 years of Hillary Clinton being the person who's going to smash the glass ceiling and make women fully equal to men at last by showing them that she can do the most powerful job in the world. These people don't just give that up, especially in the face of Donald Trump, who they are terrified of. George H.W. Bush, George Bush's father, declared he's going to vote for Hillary Clinton. He was president of the United States as a Republican, and he's going to vote Hillary. Why? Why? Because if you have the Bush family and the Clinton family, and all that we do is bat and forth between the Bushes, who's going to be president this time? The Bushes or the Clintons? It's like War of the Roses. It's like the House of Lancaster versus the House of York. And when George H.W. Bush says, I'm going to vote for Hillary, what he's really saying is, we would much rather, the news media, the politicians in Washington, all of the advisors, all of the paid consultants, all of them, don't really care if it's a Republican or a Democrat, because even if it's one or the other, they still keep their jobs. They get to be on TV and they get to these outrageous consulting fees. And as long as it's one or the other who belongs to them, then they get to keep their jobs. But somebody comes in from the outside, that's not just a threat to their party losing the election. That's a threat to both parties, because we're talking about now we're down to the business of the real race and the real election, which is between the people and the government. And imagine my surprise to discover that as this government, which I think is the most pure example of human behavior on the face of the earth. I think the history of the United States and the history of the U.S. government up until a very short time ago is as exemplary a group of people as could possibly exist in the real world. There have been many, 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 crimes and many, many, many stains on our national honor, and I'm not trying to ignore those. But for a government to be this powerful for this long and to behave so well, it's astonishing. And we have always maintained as conservatives it's because power is decentralized. Washington's not the capital of America in terms of the way that London is, or Moscow is, or Paris is. Because if you go to Paris or Moscow or London, all of everything is in the capital. That's it. That's all there is. And up until very recently, Washington was a little out-of-the-way town, Finance, New York City. Entertainment, Los Angeles. Livestock and agriculture, Chicago. Energy, Dallas. And all of these huge things were spread out all over the country and was working just great. And then they did a bunch of things, including the 17th Amendment, which we're not going to get into. And now all the power's in Washington. And as we said, and as they denied, the more powerful they get, the more corrupt they become. And Hillary Clinton is this corrupt, and Hillary Clinton can lie to your face. They can lie to your face. There were no classified information on my server, and I turned in all of my work-related details. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. I mentioned it somewhere. It might have been on a Right Angle show. This is not for the faint of heart. Okay, this is not really for my audience. But there's a black comedian named Cat Williams, and Cat Williams did a rant on Michael Jackson when Michael Jackson was still alive, and it is nothing but F-bombs and N-words, nothing but. However, with that said, I loved it. I thought it was blindingly funny. But the main thing about it was here's Cat Williams, a black comedian, talking about Michael Jackson and filled with rage for all of the things that he was doing. And he basically says, you know, you look into the camera and you tell us that you've never had any surgery on your face. Or you look into the camera and you tell us that these three blonde, blue-eyed kids are your biological children. And Cat Williams says, I'm a grown man. I'm a grown man, you know. Just for God's sake, what do you take us for? Well, they take us for idiots. And I get the feeling we're going to find out very quickly that they're in some trouble. They're in some trouble. Hillary had I think she was up enormously in North Carolina. Then I hear Donald Trump is up one. She had a huge fundraiser. I think it was today. As we record this, September 21st, she had a huge fundraiser and big questions about her health, and she canceled it at the last minute due to undisclosed reasons. They didn't say why. It's weird because I can see from the comment stream that something is going on in Charlotte. Something sounds like it lit up, but I can't pay attention for that right now. I'm sorry about that. Get to it tomorrow. So anyway, yeah, folks, it's going to be nuts. And I have a question specifically that addresses, I think, what Trump should do and can do. So I'll save that for later and just say, you know, my God, this is unbelievable. We've never seen anything like it. But it is a conspiracy. A conspiracy is a group of people coming together to achieve a purpose which no one else is supposed to know about. And this is, as a guy who's fought conspiracies all his life because of the poor evidence, I'm telling you, this evidence is overwhelming and compelling and incontrovertible. Anyway, let's get to the show, why don't we? Because that's why we're here. That's why you're here. I'm here because the bottom of this chair is actually one of these recharging plates. It's like the bottom of an iPhone. I said, well, never mind that. You don't need to know that. Okay, so let's get going here. Ted, you have to forgive me now because the blue on our printer's expired and has been for a while. Carla, if you're watching, we need to get color cartridges. Here we go. So anyway, it looks like Ted Yantia. Ted, I'm sorry if I get it wrong. It's very, very hard for me to read. But he's got a great question. It got the most upticks, so we're going to start with that one. And it was this. Could you speculate how life would be different had the standard for electricity been Edison's DC, direct current, instead of Tesla's AC? For one, we would not have a massive power grid because generators would need to be more local, as DC power losses are too great over distance to be practical. Would we have come up with a better efficient batteries by now had there been a need for them way sooner than the electric cars need for massive power cells? I don't know anything really about that issue, Ted, which is why I'm delighted to talk about it for 15 minutes. Look, the difference between AC and DC, for those of you who don't know, is that the alternating current, the first electrical systems were designed with direct current, which makes sense. You just push electrons down a wire, and the current goes one way. Tesla discovered that alternating current, which went back and forth, which is what we're using, is more efficient to transmit electricity over long distances. And in order to prove how deadly Tesla's championing of alternative current AC was, Edison had an elephant electrocuted. Not by accident. He just basically got an elephant to stand there, and he hooked up the legs to alternating current and threw the switch, and the elephant died. Just caught fire, down. And Edison did this to show people how dangerous AC was. And to me, it's an indication of what kind of person Edison was. And as I get older and older and further away from the Wizard of Menlo Park, I realized that Edison was, like many great people, a not very nice man. He was buddies with Henry Ford, and he wasn't a very nice man. But they did change the world. People say, well, he didn't invent the light bulb. Some other guy maybe in Tasmania invented the light bulb 16 years earlier. Well, number one, there's no evidence. And number two, if you invent the light bulb in a cave someplace and nobody finds out about it, then you didn't really, what difference does it make at this point? So here's why I wanted to take this question, because there's two things in here that I think are really interesting. One of them is there's a lot of Tesla worship going on out there. And this is the kind of the fallacy of the untaken path. I don't know if that's an actual term, but I just invented it. So basically, what it says is, what I'm saying is, when you go down one road, by definition, you don't go down the other. And so, as you go down the road that you've chosen to go down, there are pros and cons, good things and bad things, and you endure them. But you can imagine what life would be like on the other road, and that is almost always a better road in your mind. The road that we didn't take, especially if we run into real difficulties, is 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 fraught with real world disappointments and real world problems, and we assume that the road that we didn't take is going to be much, much better. I just have to do this. It's driving me nuts here. Sorry, one second. Frame composition is everything. So on that level, there's that, and there's a lot of people who talk about Tesla, who I have a lot of respect for, and certainly Tesla got screwed by by Edison badly, but a lot of people think that Tesla had the ability to transmit basically unlimited free energy through static electricity, and that if we'd listened to Tesla, we would have our houses all be making their own electricity. We wouldn't need any of this, power stations and all the rest. That seems highly unlikely to me. And so, so many times people get this kind of idea that if we had done something else, then everything would have been smooth sailing. Classic example of this is the Kennedy assassination. A lot of people said John Kennedy was trying to get us out of Vietnam, and if only Kennedy had not been assassinated, then the Vietnam War as we know it never would have happened. We don't know that to be true. He may have escalated the Vietnam War. We don't know. But when you get into that road not taken thinking, you think, well, if John Kennedy hadn't been assassinated, we would have been out of Vietnam. And then you think, and if we were out of Vietnam, then we wouldn't have had all of the problems of the 60s. And then you think if we didn't have all the problems of the 60s, and all of these university professors would be in positions of power and money, and then this is it's very attractive, it's very lucrative. So there's that. And then the other thing that I think is important, I'll scooch over to the left and take advantage of what these people are telling me on the comment stream. And the other thing I'm interested in this is this. Is that Ted's question talks a little bit about the electric grid. And this is the single greatest vulnerability that we have. I listened to an incredible briefing by Frank Gaffney, who's a person I've worked with and I like very much, very, very smart, patriotic man. And basically there is a terrorist attack that nobody's heard of, and it's not invented, and it's not, it's real. It happened. And I don't remember the date, so excuse me for this, but it was after 9/11, and it turned out that a bunch of people in vans with AK-47s went to a critical electrical switching station up in Silicon Valley, and they started shooting up the station with AK-47s, and they started knocking out these transformers and these power units and all the rest. And they cut the control lines to that power station, to that switching station. They knew where they were. They cut 5 control lines, and as it turns out, there was a sixth one that they didn't know about. And as this thing got shot up with AK-47 bullets and started to overheat, the engineers were able to basically shut off that electrical system and save it from melting. Here's what's so horrifying about this. Frank Gaffney tells me that the actual machine in question, the thing that does the actual shifting of the power and pushing it down the road and so on, it's just enormous. It's a ton or two. And here's the part that's really scary. It is absolutely unique to that power station. It's not like we have 50 of them on the shelf, and if one of them gets destroyed, we can just pull another one off the shelf. Each one is custom built to the power station because it got, our electrical grid built slowly over 100 years. So here's what's interesting, is if they had known about that 6th control wire and cut those communication cables, then that power transmission station would have melted. And that wouldn't have been an explosion, and it wouldn't have been Chernobyl, it wouldn't have been anything. But it would mean that Silicon Valley and all of the South Bay and San Francisco, probably including up to San Francisco, would have been without electricity for 6 months. 6 months. Maybe a year. 6 months to a year. 5 guys with AK-47s in a van could have basically crippled the this the tech the tech heart of America. And that tells me that 5, 6, 7, 8 guys with AK-47s strategically placed around the country, and you don't need many more than 20, 30 of these teams at the tops. You probably could get by with 5 or 6. If these teams go out there and do something very simple, which is just shoot through a chain link fence with an AK-47, it's not like they're trying to get to the president. It's not like they're trying to get inside the control room of a nuclear reactor. If they just shot up enough of these things, we would be out of power for years. And if this country lost electrical power for years, it would be the Stone Age. It would be the Stone Age. Even if we got all the assistance in the world in the military, there's 300 million people in this country, and large numbers of them are in inner cities. And when the power goes out, not only do you not have an ATM or an internet, that's your immediate problem. No internet and no lights. And that problem lasts for about 6 hours, maybe 12 hours, at which point you begin to realize, okay, this is going on long. So you go down to the ATM to get some money out, and the ATM doesn't work. And all of the cash registers at the stores don't work. And even if you went and stole the stuff or wrote an IOU or whatever, within 2 or 3 days, all of the food in the supermarkets will begin to rot because the food is stored in refrigerated areas, and so they require electricity. Water doesn't get pumped, and you've got whatever water you've got in the house. If you're smart enough to have not used your toilet, you can drink that for a while. This is what we're talking about, and we're talking about it all across the country. You don't need an electronic EMP attack. You can just do it with guys with AK-47s. You can do it with a nuke exploded in space and get a pulse that'll do essentially the same thing and bring down the power grid. But here's all I wanted to say about that, and the main reason I took this question, aside from the fact that it was a first-rated question. This is the kind of thing where you have a known problem and you don't do anything about it. A critical known problem, and you don't do anything about it. And the reason you don't do anything about it is because it'd be very expensive, very time consuming, and it hasn't happened yet. And this is the actual hole in the human psyche. This is what gets us into so much trouble. Something catastrophic could happen. Yes, that's true. And we know that this could happen now because of this defect, right? Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So we should fix it, right? Well, it hasn't happened yet. Maybe we could talk about it after the next mission. And the more you get by without it, the more likely you are to just assume that it's going to be okay. And I can give you 3 examples of this. One is the one I just gave you, the electric grid of the United States. We wake up one day and all these things have been taken down. We're not going to know about it from the news because there's not going to be any news. But if all the electricity in the country goes out, we will have known that we could have done something about this, which means we could have hardened these facilities, could put some armor around those cooling areas, and we could have these transformers be standardized, so you just had them scattered all throughout the United States, and if you had to, you get one off the shelf, put it on a truck, on a flatbed, haul it down to the power station, and get your power back in 2 days. But no, we don't do that because it hasn't happened yet. Second example of this kind of wishful thinking is the Challenger, which we knew that the Challenger space shuttle, we knew that the entire space shuttle program had been endangered by poor O-rings on the external boosters, on the external, the solid rocket boosters, the SRBs on the side of the tank. And prior to Challenger exploding, we knew that these were bad seals. And the reason we knew is because we recovered those at the end of the mission. At the beginning of the mission, they come off the tank, they parachute down, we get them back, and we recycle them, and we kind of rehab them and get them ready to go. And they were finding for a number of missions, that this O-ring was leaking and could have catastrophically destroyed the mission, but it didn't, so they kept going. And they kept going until it got cold enough so that the O-rings actually froze even worse, and then the shuttle blew up. And the final example is the Columbia. The Columbia, we knew that with this new environmentally friendly foam that they're putting on the external tank, we knew that this external tank, as it's going up through the air and goes through supersonic speeds, that bits of foam were coming off of the tank. And people knew that this was not supposed to be happen. It didn't happen before we went to the environmentally friendly foam. So is this good? Is this bad? We didn't check. It didn't cause us any problems. And foam was coming off of those tanks again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And then one day, the foam came off and hit the leading edge of the Columbia, and 10 days later, 7 people burned up over southern United States because we didn't address a problem that we knew existed. And when Challenger was lost, weeks or months later, engineers took some foam and shot it at the front edge of a wing. Now, the problem is they shot it at the front edge of a wing in an atmosphere. They blew it at the front edge of the wing, didn't do any damage. But where that foam was shedding, the atmosphere is so thin, it's virtually a vacuum. And so when they took the air out of there and shot the foam at 350, 400 miles an hour, whatever the shuttle's going at that speed, it put a hole the size of a washing machine in the leading edge of the Columbia's wing, of a mock-up of the wing. And we could have known this earlier, and we could have done something about it earlier, but we didn't, for the same reason that we're not doing anything here. Now, somebody said, a big spending program, how conservative have you, Bill? I don't know if that's a joke or whether it's a serious criticism. But look, there's two things I will say about that. First of all, power companies are private companies. Most of them are anyway. It's Consolidated Edison or whatever. So these are investments that the private companies have to make in order to continue to provide their service. I don't see anything unconservative about that idea. And secondly, things like public works, like roads and electrical grids, in my opinion, are in fact legitimate things that the government needs to be involved with. The government doesn't have to tell Edison how to run its business, but the government can say that there are certain guidelines or certain things that we need to do because all of these things have to work with each other. I don't see any particular contradiction in this, and it's not like I want the big spending program taken out of the general fund, so let's raise taxes. The point I'm saying is this: we are in real danger with the electrical grid. And I say this, I've said this about this election too. Something like the electrical grid, if it happens, we'll be able to say that we were on board the Titanic and we spotted the iceberg 100 miles away. We spotted it on the horizon and we kept sailing closer and closer and closer, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and we sailed right towards it. And then to our absolute astonishment, it hits the ship and the ship sinks and we're all in the water, freezing and dying. And we knew it was there. We knew it. We just didn't do anything about it. All right, so much for that. Thanks, Ted. Chris Johnson has an interesting question. I just turned 30. I did a lot of growing up and learning to think in my 20s. Congratulations, Chris, you're ahead of the curve there. I want to keep getting better in my 30s. What do I have to look forward to, and what should I watch out for on my march to 40? Thank you very respectfully, Chris Johnson. Well, very respectfully to you, Chris. Great question. Thank you. I don't know if I can help you too much because my life has been a little atypical. However, I think what happens to most people over the course of their life is that in your 30s are going to determine the rest of your life, because in your 20s and your teens, but especially in your 20s, you have dreams about what you want to do. People are in their 20s and they want to be actors, let's say, or maybe they want to be airline pilots or fighter pilots, or maybe they want to be internet celebrities or internet commentators, whatever the dream is, whatever it is. And you can maintain that dream through your 20s. I'm speaking very generally here, but it's a general question. You can maintain that dream through the 20s, your 20s. But by the time you get to 30, if it's not working by this point, you will know it, because you've already dedicated, I almost said wasted, but it's not a waste, but I almost said that. You've already sunk a whole decade of your life, in fact, one of the prime decades of your life, into following this dream. And if it's not working, by the time you're in your 30s, you'll know. Conversely, if it is working, you'll know too, and that's a lovely feeling. So the 30s, I think, are a time when people tend to have to make a decision, a permanent decision, about what they're going to settle for versus what they originally thought they were going to get. And that doesn't always have to be bad. Sometimes you meet the person of your dreams much later in life. You might be, who knows, 50, 60, 70, who knows. It can happen late in life, but generally speaking, you're going to be looking to get married and all the benefits that brings and all the rest of it. And what I'm trying to say here is, Chris, is your 30s, think of your 30s as wet cement. I'm just making this up as I go along, but it sounds like it kind of makes sense. Think of your 30s as wet cement that is getting harder every year. It's starting to set, and you can still move around, but every minute that cement gets harder and drier, and your options get more and more limited. So, if you're on the path of a dream you had as a younger person, you should know by the time you're in your early 30s whether or not this is working or not. And if it's not working, then you can either reevaluate the dream, figure out what you did wrong, stick with it. That's what I did. I didn't take my own advice here. I just stuck with it because I just didn't know what else to do. But most people face that moment of confronting the fact that their life is not going to be what they hoped it would be, and that usually happens in your 30s. I'm going to fix this too. It's bugging me a little bit. Hey, I think that's really it. Your 30s are really your first adult decade too, Chris. If you're making, you already, it's very clear to me, you've got nothing to worry about. Just the person who would have the kind of reflection to say that I did a lot of growing up and learning in my 20s, and now how do I get to my 30s? Somebody who's got the wisdom, the maturity, the humility, the confidence, frankly, the confidence to ask a question like that. I'm not worried about you at all. It's the people that don't think about these things that I'm worried about and that end up getting bitten. So I would say, just to close on this, on your way between 30 and 40, by now you should know what you want to do. And your 30s are your chance to find out if you're good at it enough to make a living at it. If you find something you really love and you can make a living at it, Chris, then by God, by all means, follow that as hard as you can, because if you get that kind of job, you'll never work again. I've been doing this for 12 years, but I haven't, and I've had my own office here for 3. I haven't been to work in at least 3 years. At least 3. I probably haven't been to work in 8 years. I haven't had that feeling of, oh my God, it's time to get up and go to work. No, I design my work around what I want to do. And as I always try to say at the beginning and end, or at least at the end of these shows, I owe that to you. I owe that to the people who are watching the show right now. Thank you very much. I try to provide service in exchange for that, and that's up for the market to decide. However, Chris, in your 30s, you're going to find out whether you want to, what the things that you originally thought you were going to do, you're going to find out whether they're working or not. If they are working, for God's sake, stick with them, and then find somebody to marry. If I recall correctly, it was a couple hours ago, your Facebook thumbnail picture was you with the lovely lady, and you looking at each other. And if I got that right, and if it turns out that that you guys are as comfortable in your early 30s as you look in your 20s, then you need to marry that person. But as far as marrying goes, I will say this: you need to have somebody. People talk about, should they be common interests? Should they be completely different interests? Should they be what about blah blah blah? Late in life, I discovered, very late in life, like 12:30 this afternoon, something like that, that the most important thing, the single most important thing in the person you're going to marry, I think, is, do you respect them or not? That's really it. Because if you respect them, then you don't. If you respect them, you're not tempted. If you respect them, then you're not tempted. If you don't respect them, then it's going to show. And if you don't respect somebody who you marry, you're going to show it in little ways. You're going to make a mess out of things, and you're not going to, be the kind of guy you wanted to be. Or if you're a woman, you won't be doing all the things that you know you could do to make your husband happy, but you don't do it because you don't respect him. And basically, when you don't respect somebody, subconsciously you start putting up these little balloons, and you sort of set these invisible balloons around, and you wait for somebody to pop them. And when they don't get popped, then you get more and more angry, and you set more and more balloons and more standards. So people, I've seen this so many times, couples or people will destroy each other because, just take the case of a man or woman, for example. If this woman thinks that this man is somewhat weak, and she'll put a specific emotional problem in his face, maybe she'll yell at him or something. Or maybe if she wants to get my attention, maybe she'll yell at him in public in front of his friends. And if he takes that and doesn't say anything about it, then she'll put up something even more outrageous. And if he takes that, and after 3 or 4 steps he keeps walking backwards, and at no point ever, he never sits down and says to her, this is going to stop now because I will not tolerate this. So if you want to continue this relationship, you will stop doing this. You will never, ever embarrass me in front of my friends again. If I did something wrong or awful, we can talk about it in private. I'm perfectly happy to admit that I was wrong, and I'm perfectly happy to have an argument, but you will never insult me in front of my friends again. We understand this? They're looking for that, and that's somebody you respect. And you need to respect the person you're going to marry, because marrying in the 30s is really important. If you got married in your 20s and you're still married, you got lucky, because people change enormously between their 20s and their 30s. But the main thing is, do you respect this person? And then, Chris, the other thing is, this has to be mutual. You have to ask yourself, what can you do to make all of those dreams that your wife had in her 20s come true? What does she want in the world? Not just for you or for the couple or for the relationship. What does she want? What does she want? Does she want to be a housewife and a mom? That's great. Does she want to be a dancer? Does she want to be a painter? Whatever it is, you got to find out what she wants. And you got to do everything you can to make that happen. And she has to do the same for you. And then when you find yourself with a teammate like that, it gets an awful lot easier. Trust me, an awful lot easier. So what a profoundly adult, mature, thoughtful question. And as I say, Chris, I'm not worried about you at all. So let's move on. Susan Speakman is back and leads me to another observation. A somewhat worrisome one. And my observation is, what happened to the Tiemans? Where are the Tiemans? The Tiemans brothers owned every single question for 40 episodes. Every question was a question from one of the Tiemans brothers, and I haven't seen them for a while. I hope you're okay out there, guys. If you're in any trouble, for God's sakes, let me know, because I miss seeing you. Maybe you've gone to your real names. Maybe you were never brothers at all. That never occurred to me until just this second. But in any event, you got to be brothers because the questions were so sharp and they were all related. Anyway, Tiemans, if you're out there, send up a flare. I'd like to know you're doing okay. But Susan Speakman has been asking some great questions, so let's go to this one. If Hillary should be elected, God forbid, and if she becomes incapacitated after inauguration, how do we prevent Bill Clinton from becoming the puppet master, hiding Hillary's condition from everyone, and essentially running the country a la Edith Wilson? This question was sparked by a recent Right Angle on the Running Mates. It's good to know somebody's watching Right Angle. I'd certainly enjoy doing it. So the question basically is, Hillary gets elected. We know that she's gravely ill, and let's say that she's incapacitated. This is an interesting question because it got me thinking about something I hadn't really considered before. I had thought that that Hillary Clinton's vice presidential pick is the worst vice presidential pick I've ever seen ever. He is an absolute nothing. He has no charisma. He has no track record. He's unknown on the national scene. It is I thought it was almost a slam dunk win for Trump when she picked this guy Kane. He's a nothing burger, and not just a nothing burger in terms of his record. When you watch him back, Hillary will be speaking, and he'll be on the back behind her, looking supportive and everything. And he looks like a guy he looks like a pizza delivery guy who's just waiting to get his tip, He looks like somebody so beta and so supportive. He's a nothing. And I thought, why? Why this pick? And then I realized that one of the reasons maybe is that the vice president's going to be Bill. Now, needless to say, Bill Clinton is legally and constitutionally barred from becoming president again. Because of that amendment. I forget which one it was. It got to be around 24, somewhere in there, 24th, 25th Amendment, which basically said president could only serve 2 terms after Franklin Delano Roosevelt served 4, at least was elected 4 times. So Bill can't do this in front. He can't become vice president because if something happens to the president, he becomes president, and then all of a sudden he can't be president again. But the weaker the vice presidential pick is, the stronger he can be, and the less interference the Clinton machine, which is really the two of them, has to worry about. The relationship between Bill and Hillary Clinton, someday all of this will come out. Most of it is out now, but this relationship is got to be one of the most interesting relationships in the world. You can just tell that these people hate each other. She just despises him. I'm convinced that the reason she's risking her life and basically crawling out of her deathbed to make a 20-minute speech and crawling back to the hospital, why does this woman want to be president so much? I'm utterly convinced that she wants to be president because Bill Clinton has embarrassed her publicly for 40 years. For 40 years, she's had to stand there and be the other woman. For 40 years, she had to stand there and be the spurned housewife or the spurned wife, and she has to stand there by her man and do the right thing, and we'll get past this. And yes, it was a terrible mistake, and Bill pretends to cry and relent, and then he does it again, and then he does it again. I've heard, in such a way that I believe it, that when the Lewinsky thing happened, she said, yeah, we sexual relations in the White House, in the Oval Office. And Bill Clinton apparently turned to Hillary and said, it's not true. It's not true. It doesn't happen. It didn't happen. It's not true. It's absolutely untrue, Hillary. And she believed him. And she went out defending him, thinking this is a bimbo trying to attack her and her sacred territory. And I've heard that when Bill finally did admit that he did it, and the only reason Bill Clinton admitted that it happened, and the only reason that the Lewinsky scandal happened, and the only reason he was impeached for perjury is because there was physical evidence. These Clintons have been lying every day of their life. However, she had a stain on a dress, and you can't lie your way past that. And when Bill told Hillary this, I've heard she just threw things across the room, just throwing chairs at him. They don't like each other very much. You can tell that Bill is not particularly interested in Hillary Clinton as a date, and yet they both. Every time you see them, they've got their heads down. They're talking to each other, and I think they're just both power power mad narcissists who realize that the other one can help them, even though they despise each other. If there was no power involved, then they would have been divorced. If they've been married 40 years, they would have been divorced 39 years ago. But both of these people have this horrible, horrible, horrible moral defect, which is to say, I'm going to do evil things, and she's going to do evil things, and I'm going to pretend that she's my wife, and I'm going to pretend that he's my husband, and we're going to go to life together, hating each other, despising each other, in order for us to have the power that we want. I think Bill Clinton became president because he wanted to meet chicks. I really do. I haven't seen anything else in his life that motivates him besides hitting on women. And I guess if power is an aphrodisiac, and if you're president of the United States, now all of a sudden Sharon Stone is falling down all over you. And I think he just became president because he was a good talker and wanted to meet chicks. I think she wants to become president to show Bill Clinton once and for all that this is her way of getting even. You embarrassed me for 40 years, and now, in exchange for that, I want the presidency. I want the presidency of the United States of America. She's one of those very bitter feminists, very, very angry, bitter feminists, and to her, this is the big achievement. I don't think they think about it much. They're so deep in it for so long that it's almost like, a fish doesn't notice the water it's swimming in. But it's, what do you say? What do you say? Specifically, to answer a little bit of the question, for those of you that may not know it, Edith Wilson, who was Woodrow Wilson's wife, Woodrow, apparently I've been told by 5 people now, by the way, I'm going to interrupt myself, that I got the law on the POTUS terms wrong. Apparently he could be something about you can't be elected 3 times. I don't know. So just assume that my assertion is incorrect. Nevertheless, Bill Clinton cannot run for president or vice president. And if I was wrong about the backstage reasons, the fact is politically he can't do either of those things. Anyway, so Edith Wilson was Woodrow Wilson's wife, and during the last months of Woodrow Wilson's presidency, he'd suffered a very severe stroke, and Edith Wilson, the first lady, ran the country for 6 months. Wasn't known at the time, but she ran the country, and she did it because she was manipulating Woodrow Wilson's reputation, basically. And I don't know that the 6 months that Edith ran the country were any worse than the months that Woodrow ran it. Woodrow Wilson was one of the biggest catastrophes ever to hit this country. But how do we know that Bill is not behind the scenes running the country? Well, we don't know. We know that if she's elected, that'll probably be a big part of it. And so let's not elect her. How about that? It's, when reality gets to be the kind of thing where if you wrote it in a movie and people would say, no, I wouldn't believe that, it's too on the nose, you got to soften that up a little bit. I never thought I'd be living in a time like this. I never thought I'd see that happen to this country. I never in a million years. I knew we'd have problems. I knew we'd have socialists. I knew we'd have communists. I knew we'd have external threats, all of this stuff. And even with Obama, I knew we'd have basically a person who so sympathized with our ideological enemy that he's on their side. There's no question about it that Barack Obama's on the side of Islam and never fails to condemn America when he's overseas. We're lazy, we're stupid, we're mean, we're prejudiced, we're all these other things. If you don't like it, then go become president some other place. Parenthetically, Obama's last speech at the United Nations, which is his most recent speech and his final speech as president, and that's got a nice ring to it, basically said that we have to give up freedom of action. Powerful countries, like my country, the United States of America, need to give up freedom of action so that we can all collectively together form essentially one world government, and then once we're all under the same government, everything will be fine. There's 2 things about that I'd like to say. First of all, the United Nations, when it was formed in 1945, we assumed that the civilizations of the great powers, the United States, Britain, France, Russia, and China, we assumed that these would raise the smaller countries up to their level, but that's not how it happened. It's a bureaucracy. Over 30 years, the UN brought these countries down to the level of Cuba and Iran, morally and for all intents and purposes politically too. So isn't it interesting how fast Obama moves on the idea of giving up American sovereignty and rights and so on in order to form a world government. And I heard him give this speech, and my thought was simply this. He has had the most powerful job in the world as president of the United States. He's going to be gone in 4 or 5 months. What's he going to do after that? Is he going to host a radio show? I kind of think that he's trying to do this because he thinks if we have an international government, all the countries in the world give up their borders and their sovereignty, and we have a national world government. Wouldn't that be swell? I wonder who they could get for president of that. I wonder. I think I'm having a small seizure of some kind. It's mostly probably just dehydration on my part. No, I just can't believe I'm seeing the things I'm seeing. I can't believe it. For those of you, it's funny, how the little things are, but I mean, many of you will relate to this. Some of you will be too young. But when I was growing up, one of the shows we used to watch all the time was the FBI with Ephraim Semblitz Jr. The FBI, da, da, da. And, these guys were incorruptible, the untouchables. They're the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You can't touch them. They're incorruptible. They are above corruption because they're all a series of dedicated individuals who are just determined to go into law enforcement. And that was the internal culture of the FBI. Now the FBI is just another political wing like Acorn or the teachers union or anything else. It's unbelievable. All right, here we go. Moving on. David Wellman is back, and he has an interesting question. He says, I have noticed that the supporters of the major parties in social media, the biosphere, that might be the blogosphere supposed to be, and opinion pages have devolved more or less into the other candidate is worse. 100% negative campaigning. Hillary is an unindicted felon. Trump is an unrepentant bigot, etc. Does it say anything that neither camp offers little to no affirmative support? Does it even matter? Well, of course it matters. In a healthy republic, we'd have two people who are highly qualified for the job. In a healthy republic, we'd have two of the most qualified people in the country instead of two of the worst people in the country, in terms of their fitness to be president. So there's that. Just the fact that every single American knows that this cycle, 2016, is a train wreck. Have you ever heard of one person ever who thinks that this is really something to be proud of for the country? No. The Republicans or the conservatives among us think that Hillary Clinton is a felon, a traitor, and a serial, perpetual liar and perjurer. And the left thinks that Donald Trump is a simple-minded lunatic who wants to kill Muslims and Mexicans and build a Berlin Wall around the United States. And nobody in this country thinks, hey, this is going to be a great election. Nobody. How it fell this far? How did it fall this far? It fell this far because of Obama and the media and the entertainment business. I talked about this before. Is this iron triangle? Democratic, progressive politicians in Washington, progressive people in the news medias in New York, and progressives making the culture in Hollywood. And these things go round and round. And they've been telling us what to think for so long that the American people are furious. And in a way, this is a very clear election because there is no one more on the inside than Hillary Clinton, and there's no one more on the outside than Donald Trump. So this election, we're going to find out whether or not this is worth the Republicans versus the Democrats, or whether it's the people versus the Washington insiders. It's starting to look that way. I have this funny feeling, and look, I've spent the last two elections holding on to funny feelings just to have my heart broken, but I have a funny feeling that Trump could win this thing big. And the main reason I feel that way is because, number one, we know that the media is in the pocket of the Clintons from all the times they've cut to black hair. But the main thing is the rallies. Trump will go to a stadium, he'll put 60, 70,000 people into a stadium. And Hillary Clinton won't fill 200 people in a gym. That's evidence. That's something. And it's not just in one place or one state. It's all across the country. He's got sellout crowds, lines around the block. There are protesters there. There's violence there trying to stop people to go hear Donald Trump. And Hillary Clinton can't fill up a smallish, room in a convention center. There's a chance that he could just win this thing big. There's a chance he could lose it big. Nobody knows. This is a really strange year. Anyway, David, there's something very, very important about your question. I can't really explain how we got here, but there's something really profoundly important about, since we're here, what can we do? we start with the actual facts, right? And the actual facts are Donald Trump is the most unpopular person ever to run for the president of the United States in the history of the country, and the second most hated person to run for president is Hillary Clinton. We have the number one and number two most disliked politicians at the top of the ticket. That's just that alone tells you how much trouble this country's in. However, Hillary is in real trouble with the sickness, and she's getting more and more sick, and she's missing more and more events. Trump, for the last several weeks, if months now, is looking presidential. It seems to me that 3 or 4 months ago, when Hillary went down during the 9/11 thing, it seems like 3 or 4 months ago, Trump would have immediately tweeted something like, "She can't even stand on a curb and get into a car, and she wants to be president of the United States? Question mark, question mark, question mark." But he didn't. He said, I certainly wish her well, and I look forward to seeing her in debates. That's presidential. That sounds presidential. The move to Mexico was brilliant and presidential. He didn't just go down to Mexico and hold up rabbit ears behind the head of the Mexican president. He came back with some agreements of the incoming Mexican president. Brilliant. So here's where the whole point comes up, David. Think about this. The one thing that we do not have anywhere in this election is magnanimity. We don't have any grace. We don't have any compassion. We don't have any self-deprecation. It's all mud. I wish it was just mud, being slung back and forth all the time. If Donald Trump goes to these debates and pins Hillary down in terms of the issues, but if he offers people a sense of compassion, and look, I haven't seen this video of him at this black church apparently, but by all accounts, he's at this yet another all-black church, and he is they're all in it. They're just loving him, and he's clapping along and applauding along. If Donald, here's what I'm trying to say, in a campaign that's so negative, both candidates have a chance to get their numbers way up by doing something positive, by doing something noble. I just think that Hillary Clinton is constitutionally incapable of doing it. I don't mean the U.S. Constitution. I mean internally. She can't do it. She's a little rat that lies all the time about everything, and the idea wouldn't even enter her head. If Donald Trump has the discipline, and it looks like he's starting to have the discipline, Donald Trump has the discipline to be courteous, to be generous, to be restrained, and to offer at any chance he can a sense of lightheartedness, the kind of thing we saw with Kennedy and Nixon and Reagan and Mondale. If he has the ability to keep that mouth of his under control and show generosity of spirit, then there will be positives on the table. There will be positives that's never been picked up before. He's going to pick up the only positive vibes in the entire election. He's going to run away with it. We're going to find out. The first debate is just a few days away, and word is, as we record this, that Hillary is talking about canceling it. What do you do if you cancel a debate? Well, here's the thing. There's a term that's really effective term called optics. It's a political term, but the question is, what are the optics? In other words, how does this look? How does this look on TV? The optics are terrible means this just looks awful. So for Hillary Clinton to take a week off, this we're talking about 2-3 weeks ago, take a week off in the heart of the run-up to the presidency, and she just disappears for a week, the optics of that are so terrible, it looks so awful, that the only reason that she disappeared was because the alternative would have been worse. In other words, Hillary disappearing for a week at a critical time in the election, just not showing up and not saying why, looks so bad. And the only reason you can justify her doing it is because if she didn't, she would simply fall off the stage. So the optics are terrible. She missed this fundraiser in North Carolina, a state she really needs. She didn't show up. She canceled it, and she didn't say why. Those optics are terrible. When Donald Trump offers a sense of generosity and decency and says, "Well, I wish her the very best. I hope she gets better right away, and we'll meet on the playing field, and we'll sort it out like honorable people." It's really tipping very, very fast, very fast. Everybody is terrified of Donald Trump, and I have many concerns about him, and I haven't been shy about expressing them. He certainly is not more. He's certainly not a conservative in the way that I understand the term, and to me, there is a philosophy called conservatism. It's like Buddhism or Maoism or Trotskyism. It's a philosophy, and it's internally consistent, and and I understand it. I like it, and I love it. I think it works. And many of these precepts he does not share. So okay, but is he better than Hillary Clinton? He's 1,000 times better than Hillary Clinton. And I've said for quite a while now that the reason Donald Trump has got the support he does is that many people who are voting for him you'll say he's not a conservative, and they'll go, I know. And they'll say, well, he's a kind of a loose cannon in terms of the things he says, and they'll say, I know. And then you'll say all these other things, and they'll say, we know all of this. It's not even that we have to have somebody beat Hillary Clinton. We know all of it. Donald Trump is an unknown. He's the dry erase board. Donald Trump, nobody knows what it's going to look like, but so many people in this country are so disgusted with what has been going on for so long now, certainly in the last 8 years, and really for the last 16 or so. They are so disgusted that they're willing to say, burn it down. Just burn it down. Let's just burn it down and see what comes out of it, because it cannot be any worse than what we've got. And I've been kind of in that place myself for quite a while. It's not exactly the kind of place you want to be as a patriot. You don't want to think that, my God, the country's in such awful shape that the best thing that could happen to it is politically. When I say burn it down, I mean burn it down politically. Is that we're gonna be doing all this stuff, and nobody knows how it's going to turn out. But that can't be any worse than doing the same thing that we're doing already. That's a sign of a country that's in real trouble. So there you go. But to answer your question, David, nobody is providing any affirmative support. No one is providing any nobility or pleasantness. And the first person to do it will win this election, because there's none of it. And I think Donald Trump's definitely got the chance to do it, and I don't think Hillary possibly can. She's just not built that way. She just can't do it. The strain on Hillary gets higher and higher every time she cancels an event, every time there's video of her collapsing or her eyes are looking funny or she's coughing. Every time another one of these sneak out, Hillary gets more stressed, and the more stress she gets, the more sick she gets. This is something we should probably just keep hammering, folks. I started doing Stratosphere lounges, God knows, 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. I've done 130 of them. And one of the things I talk about a lot is the rise and fall of civilization and the pattern of the rise and fall of civilization. Very slow climb. I'm going to just interrupt myself here to say that I see from the comment section that Viper Check is here. And I'm not going to release any highly classified information, because you can trust me with that kind of information. But Viper Check, congratulations on your recent promotion, or your upcoming promotion. Couldn't happen to a better man. And for those of you out there who don't know anything about what I'm talking about, it's probably better it stays that way. But I just want to assure you that the people who are defending this country in the military are some of the finest people in the world. The kindest, nicest, most deadly, awesome band of ass kickers that ever walked this earth. And you're certainly one of them, Viper. And I know your real name. So I'm just not going to say it. Congratulations on your promotion. I wish you would be promoted another 3 or 4 grades, maybe 5 stars, 4 stars. You could do some good up there. But seriously, congratulations. So where were we? Yeah, I got nothing else really to say about the Trump thing. It's going to. Oh, it was the optics, the Hillary Clinton optics. So she is in real danger of not only collapsing during the debate. I mean, I actually think she's quite in danger of dying. I mean, if you've got somebody this sick, and you don't hospitalize them, that's one thing. But if you got somebody this sick and you keep them at home, that's a risk. But if you got somebody this sick and they're under this kind of pressure, and they have to make all of these appearances all around the country, constantly in motion, constantly on a plane, constantly having to look, I don't think anybody has the constitution to survive that. I really don't. I don't know if she's going to make it to Election Day. If she collapsed before Election Day and was replaced, I would not be the slightest bit surprised. I think I'd be more surprised if she goes all the way to November 8th without going down, just going down. By the way, it's going to be the essence of my firewall. I'm not going to give it all away, but the reason that 9/11 collapse into the taxi cab, not the taxi cab, into the Secret Service car, the reason that is so damaging to her is because, now, catch this now, is really important, because it's the first time in Hillary Clinton's career, the first time ever in her career, that she has been caught lying on camera. That is it. Most people don't understand it, but that's a game changer. She's caught lying on camera. She said there were no classified emails on my server. Well, a year later, some other guy says, yes, there were. But you don't, when you see the press conference, you don't know that she's lying. And she's been doing this forever. But she's been telling us she's perfectly healthy. And when people see her collapse, they're watching her lying on camera. We see that she's lying. And I think more of that's going to be coming. And I just can't wait. I just cannot wait. It's crazy. But it's a good time to be a political pundit, I can tell you that much. Okay, so moving on here. Chris Taylor has a great question. After Trump wins the presidency, there you go, see. It won't take long for the latest version of Jesus Land, United States of Canada maps start reappearing. If that morphs into a genuine secession movement with deep blue state legislatures voting to leave the U.S., would you support waging war against them to force those states to submit to the federal government authority again, or would you let them leave in peace? Well, there's a lot to be said about that. But if you actually think that I would defend this federal government's right to kill American citizens in order to keep them in this federal union that has violated the Constitution on every possible plank at every level in the last 8 years, then the answer is no. If deep blue states wanted to leave the union, I would say have a nice trip. And in fact, I'd be delighted. The world is not the same world as it was during our Civil War. We don't solve problems so much with guns anymore. They're much more sophisticated world, far more sophisticated world. First of all, we know more about each other. Secondly, all the economies are intertwined. We started bombing Moscow right now, let's say. We'd be bombing American businesses. If you started bombing China, you'd start bombing your own factories because so much of the stuff we make is made over there. It's a whole different world. But here's what I find a little odd about your, not odd, but interesting about your question, Chris, is the idea that the blue states would leave the union. There's no that's not going to happen. It's a 100 to 1 anyway against the red states leaving, but the blue states could never leave the union because it's the liberal states that believe in the central. Whoa, holy cow! See what happens when you talk about big things, earthquakes. It's the liberals and the progressives in the blue states, the democratic states, that believe that all of this power should be concentrated into Washington, and that the people in Washington should tell everybody in the country how to live. They can't just live on their own. They have to tell you how to live. And if they're not telling you how to live, they're not happy. So the idea of blue states leaving the union, leaving the USA, leaving the federal government, just inconceivable to me. That's the last thing they would do. Red states, on the other hand, are all about people like us who say, you know what, it was nice to have a federal government. We'd still like to have a federal government if it would fit back in the box it originally came in. So if the red states decided to leave it, because we're independent, we think that this power grab is not only dangerous and not only ruinous economically, we think it's illegal. We think all of this is illegal, all of it. We think this FBI report is just pure political nonsense, and we think that the fact that Hillary Clinton wasn't indicted is just illegal and breaking the law. And it's little things. When Barack Obama says, we're going to delay the implementation of Obamacare by 6 months, that's illegal. He cannot write law. The law says it kicks in on a certain date, and he cannot just get out there and say, you know what, we're going to change the date. That's dictatorship. If he wants to change the date, he has to pass a bill saying that we're going to change the date. And he doesn't get to write that bill. Well, maybe he writes it, but Congress votes on it. By the way, the firewall after the one coming up on Hillary's health is going to be about the testimony under Congress from Loretta Lynch and Comey, and then this poor FBI stooge they trotted out last. And I just want to say one thing. There are at least 2 or 3 American patriots left in this country, and I mean honest to God, to the bones patriots. And one of them is named Trey Gowdy. And for the life of me, I cannot remember the chairman of the committee's name. He's going to come up. These guys are Americans who are, when confronted with the FBI saying, well, we gave you the reports that we thought were most germane to the case. And they say, you don't get to decide what we see. We're the Congress. And one guy literally said it out loud. He said, 800,000 people sent me here to watch over you, and you don't get to tell me what reports I see and don't see. I want to see all of them. 2 or 3 guys there, and honestly, it's just so refreshing. It's so refreshing to see that there are a few really genuinely patriotic Americans with great courage, and I think Trey Gowdy is the bulldog. And if somebody would get that guy a decent haircut, he'd be president of the United States right now, without question. He'd certainly be president in 2020. Trey Gowdy has a kind of political intelligence and a commitment to ideals. He understands conservatism, and he fights for it. I think Trey Gowdy, if I had to pick a front runner for next cycle, Trey Gowdy in a heartbeat. He is awesome. And there's a couple of others. The chairman of the committee, again, I'm looking for the name because I've forgotten it. Brilliant. He's got these people there. He says, well, you're here now. We wish that you could have come voluntarily when we asked you, but since you didn't come voluntarily, we had to compel you to come. Now that you're here, here's what's going to happen. We want to see all of the records, all of your 302s or 301s or whatever. We want to see all of them. You don't get to tell us which ones we get to see. We want to see all of them. And this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. And when he had Comey under oath, he said, well, why didn't you look into these irregularities with the Clinton Foundation and the emails? And the FBI director says, I thought very in a very coy fashion, says, well, we have no mandate for that. We weren't given a mandate. We weren't Jason Chavez. Yes, awesome guy. So the FBI director says, well, we weren't directed to look into that. And then it was Chavez, I think, said, so you're telling me that all you need is authorization? You need authorization from Congress to look into that? That's all you need? He says, yes, sir. And he said, you'll have it in an hour. And we'll write the subpoena right now, and I'll sign it right now. That's the government in action. That's what this government is supposed to be. It's supposed to be people who are playing by the rules because the rules goddamn work. They work beautifully, and if we follow them, nothing bad ever happens. And these guys are hanging on to the rules. They're hanging on to the rule of law. I think those two or three of them just give me hope in these really dark times. And Jason Chavez and Jim Jordan from Ohio as well, and Trey Gowdy. These guys are holding they're holding these criminals to the law, and they won't let go. When Hillary was basically exonerated, with the FBI saying, well, we decided we're not going to prosecute her, and Loretta Lynch says, I'm sorry, I'm just going to divert here because this is obviously something I'm really excited about. When the Attorney General of the United States is under oath, and she's asked a question about the legality of something, and she wiggles, and she wiggles, and she won't answer, and she won't answer, she won't answer, won't answer. One of these guys, and it might have been the guy from Georgia, who basically says, all right, look, it's obvious that you won't answer this question. It's obvious to us why you won't answer this question. So let me ask you a very simple question, Ms. Lynch. You're the Attorney General of the United States of America. You're the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the country. You are in head of the Department of Justice, and all federal law and downstream, really essentially all law enforcement comes to you at the top of the pyramid. So let me just ask you something really simple. If I am in a car and I am driving 65 miles an hour and the posted speed limit is 55 miles an hour, have I broken the law? And this woman, she's very smooth. She says, well, I think that would depend on the officer issuing the citation. He says, no, forget the citation. Forget whether I get a ticket or not. If I'm doing 65 in a 55 zone, am I breaking the law, yes or no? And she would say, you'd have to consult the. And then she says, you would be issued a citation for that. But am I breaking the law? As I said, you'd be issued a citation for that. Why? Well, here's why. If she says, see, this is why this was a brilliant trap, and this is why it's so obvious how corrupt these people are. Because when he said that question, what does the 55 mile an hour, 65 in a 55 zone have to do with any of this? What does it have to do with the Clinton emails, the Clinton Foundation? What does it have to do with anything? Why would that question be so important? Well, it's a critical question, and he understood it. The reason that question, that simple, ridiculous, simple analogy is so important is this. He's showing that the chief law enforcement officer in the country cannot say, yes, that would be breaking the law. She can't say that sentence. She won't say it. Something so obvious. I'm doing 65 and it's a 55 zone. Have I broken the law? Yes or no? She can't say yes. The number one law enforcement official in the United States of America cannot admit that doing 65 miles an hour in a 55 zone is breaking the law. Do you know why she can't admit that? Do you know why she can't say, yes, you'd be speeding, definitely you'd be breaking the law? Do you know why she can't? You know why she has to go to this citing officer and you'd be issued a citation and all the rest of it? Same reason as Comey gave. The reason that she can't say, yes, he'd be breaking the law if he was doing 65 in a 55 zone is because if she says that, which is the natural response that anybody can see is clearly the case. Yes, I was breaking the law. Yes, that person was breaking the law. If she says yes, he was breaking the law, then you would ask the next question, which is, well, if there's a law against speeding and I'm doing 65 in a 55 zone and breaking the law by violating the rules there is an offense punishable by a fine or something, if I break the law speeding, I'll be punished for it. So if it is true that the person who's speeding is breaking the law, how come the person that broke this law isn't getting a speeding ticket of some kind? And then he's got her. She's smart enough to not answer it, but again, the optics, it looks, that's the firewall after the next one. It's just all of these people squirming, and not squirming in that kind of Martin Short sort of way where you know you're guilty, like it's on you, squirming with the language. And I think I'm going to call that firewall. It depends on what your definition of law is. Because Bill Clinton, very famously under oath, was asked a really pointed question. He was asked, did you do this or is this the case? And Bill Clinton said, depends on what your definition of is. Okay. This is the kind of parsing of language you get from people who are guilty and who are good at lying. It was epic. So anyway, back to you, Chris. No, I wouldn't. I would never. I would not. I don't think we would ever see it happen. First of all, in the age of television and everything else, there's no way that American troops are going to fire on American citizens. The order would never be given, and if it was given, it wouldn't be followed. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. And I know there's a lot of new people in the Pentagon and a lot of these political officers, but American soldiers will not fire on American civilians. Not going to happen. Not in the Army. That's just not going to happen. And so, no, I wouldn't support keeping them in by force. I think it's much more likely that the red states secede. They say, look, this federal government's bankrupt. It's going to collapse. It's violated the law. The great state of Texas came into the Union because of the Constitution, because we were ready to obey the Constitution, and the understanding was that our elected officials would too. They don't obey the Constitution. Here's 675 reasons why in the last week they didn't do it, so we're gone. We're out of here. Red state seceding is a possibility, and frankly, if it happened, I would move there. No question. I'd just be nice if we could keep a little bit of coast, West Coast would be nice. We'll give them New York State and we'll take California. Wouldn't take but 15 guys with rifles. I'll just walk down the street with them. These California people can't even change a tire, for God's sakes. Okay, we're getting towards the end here. Anyway, we're doing it on time. Marvelous. Marvelous. And the question ended with, does my answer change as part of the separation negotiations? They got to keep the United States and the Capitol buildings and so on. Listen, just a small note about that. No matter how cynical you may be or how much of this you do and dunk your head into, and we talk about the Hill and we talk about, the presidency of the White House, this and that and so on forth. They're always using these terms. When you stand on the Mall in the Capitol and you look and you see the Capitol building on the top of that hill, it'll move you to tears. It's just astonishing. This building doesn't look like it was created by people. It looks like it was created by angels and lowered on golden threads onto the top of that hill. It's a magnificent building, and all of the ideals of what is supposed to be going on in that building will move you to tears. And then there's the Washington Monument, Lincoln on the other side, watching Jefferson's over there. It's unbelievably powerful and unbelievably important, and I would hate to give it up, but as I've said a few times, George Washington, the most noble man ever in this government and one of the most noble men who ever lived in terms of walking away from power, in terms of not being, they wanted to call him Your Excellency. Your Excellency, he said, no, you will not call me Your Excellency. You will refer to me as Mr. President. This is the least ostentatious title I can come up with, so call me Mr. President. The idea that the Capitol building would be named after that guy, which certainly was in fact, the only choice was to name the Capitol after Washington. But what's been happening in Washington for the last 40 years is so disgraceful. It's so disgraceful and appalling and forget anti-Republican, anti-Democrat. It's against everything George Washington fought for. And it's an insult to his name that the Capitol is called Washington. We should change the name of the nation's capital to Arnoldsville. I mean, really, you should name it after Benedict Arnold, after the great traitor, after the most despised person in American history. That's what the name of this country should be now. It should be Arnoldville until they start acting like it should be Washington again. All right, so moving on here. Jared Bennett has a question, which is, what are your thoughts on the seemingly growing number of disaffected liberals that are as frustrated with authoritarian progressives as we are? Sargon of Akkad, Dave Rubin, Shoe on Head, and all the rest. I don't know who any of those individuals are, but you are absolutely right. There's a large number of people who will not go down this progressive road. They see Hillary's as corrupt as we are, as we say they are, rather, and probably just a Freudian slip because there's no real integrity on our side, with the exception of those three people I mentioned a few moments ago. And yes, there's a large pool of people sitting on the ground there with nobody to vote for. They don't trust Hillary and they don't like her. They don't like this progressive movement. They know that the economy is in the tank, has been for 8 years. And at the same time, they don't like Donald Trump, and they've been told that Republicans are evil. And we've been called evil for 35 or 40 years, and we don't even have the common sense or even the sense of story or integrity to fight that slander. We've been called fascist and Nazis and we hate black people, and no one has ever stood up and said, it was the Republicans who freed the slaves. It was the Democrats who left the country. The Confederacy were the Democrats that left the country. The Confederacy, the slaveholding states of the Confederate States of America, consisted of all of the Democrats in the American Congress that left and started a new government. They were all Democrats. And the Jim Crow laws were Democrats. And all of the Ku Klux Klan were Democrats. And all the fire hoses on those black kids were Democrats. And we just sit there and take it. You guys are so racist. Well, I'm not really racist. I mean, look at me. I have a black friend. Come on. Just get out there and tell the truth. And we can't do it. We can't do it. I can do it. A couple of us can do it, but they can't. It's time to really burn the structure down. It's the structures in Washington are ossified. They're like a petrified forest. They're fossilized and they don't move anymore, and they're absolutely rigid, and they can't adapt, and they're too big, too fat, too slow, too expensive, and the economy is changing. It's all going to come down. So anyway. These disaffected liberals need to be picked up, and they need to be picked up by somebody like us. And this is why very consciously chose the slogan for this website and the work I do is the common sense resistance. I didn't call it the conservative resistance, and I didn't call it the Republican resistance. I called it the common sense resistance, because if an idea works, it doesn't matter where it comes from. If it's a good idea, it doesn't matter who came up with it. Likewise, if it's a bad idea, it doesn't matter who came up with it. What works? Common sense. Is it working? Yes or no? If it is, great, let's keep it. If it's not, then let's not keep it. If it's working, okay, let's fix it and improve it. And if the improvements make it worse, then let's stop doing that. Pretty simple, really. And I think that if somebody moved, I'm not saying move to the middle, because I don't give up any of these values, but the primary, it seems to me, in the years I've been looking at it, it seems to me that the single great defining characteristic of conservatism is get the government out of my life. That's it. Everything else orbits that. Get the government out of my life, except for the very few places where it has a legitimate right to be there. They have a right to have a navy and an army. Okay, government's good for that. Build roads is fine, but get it out of everything else. If you have that attitude about conservatism and the government, then I don't see how you can also say that the government should force people to do this or do that. And this is what the social conservatives get upset about. But you don't give up conservatism by taking the social issues out of the political arena. Fight the social issues in the social arena. I'm 100% behind the social issues that social conservatives are. I just don't think it belongs in politics. And if we ever did that, then the huge middle of this country, I'm not talking about moderates. And look, I've said this 1,000 times. This idea that we get less and less conservative and try to move more and more towards the moderates is what got us into this trouble. I'm not saying we become moderate to get these people. I'm saying we turn them into conservatives because we give them common sense. That guy broke the law. The difference between me and a progressive is a progressive knows that Hillary Clinton's broken the law repeatedly, and he's fine with that as long as she gets elected because she's going to do so much good. Me, on the other hand, I was a Ted Cruz guy. If I found out that Ted Cruz had lied about any of this stuff, if there were government, if Ted Cruz had broken any law at all, felony, if he'd committed any felony, like I didn't turn in all my records, then my attitude would not be, well, it's okay for him to do it. My attitude would be, if it's, Ted Cruz belongs in jail. Well, he's your guy. Yes, I know he's my guy, but he's my guy because I believe in the rule of law, and he seems to believe in the rule of law. And if he does something illegal, then Ted Cruz should go to jail. It's not so hard. They can't comprehend this because they have no moral bearings. They've got no sense of right and wrong. It's all about what's good for me now, and they perceive that Hillary's good for them and the progressive cause, so if the law helps, great. If the law is helping them, then we will be the champions of the law. But if the law is hurting them, then we just ignore it. It's another ratchet that they've got going for them. So yes, Jared, let's pick them up. Let's just go get them, and they're reachable, and they're reachable by people who make a compelling case with evidence, a little bit of sense of humor, and some passion behind it. Draw your own conclusions. You can become a member at BillWhittle.com. All right, so we got 2 to go. Victor Lubasek, I think. Again, Victor, sorry, it's just barely visible in gray here. Is coming in, and he asked for this one. He says, I live in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and after I heard the news of the stabbing at the Crossroads Mall, I had an instinct that the perpetrator was a Somali refugee. Of course, after some time, the news came out, affirming that intuition. I talked with some friends and coworkers, and they hesitantly admitted that they thought the same. Why should I be shamed for having an instinct as long as it does not lead to irrational violence? This is extremely well put. Well, I got to think about this for 1 second here. The word prejudice means to prejudge something. Prejudge something. And so that's actually not bad. It means to prejudge something. So if you prejudge a group of people, then you are actually, I think, doing something immoral, because there are many people in that group who are not guilty or not displaying the trait that you either find good or bad. If you say that a group is a criminal group, if you say that these crime rates are whatever they are because of a particular ethnic group or national origin or anything like that, then you are in fact harming the people who are in that group who did not commit any of these acts. Virtually all the Somalis in Minnesota didn't go and stab people in the mall. But it doesn't mean that you cannot recognize a pattern. It doesn't mean that you can't have the common sense and the just plain willingness to understand the pattern. And the pattern is that every time somebody is getting stabbed or blown up, somebody's shouting Allahu Akbar. And it doesn't matter if it happens in San Bernardino or in Minnesota or in Orlando or in Brussels or in Paris or in Moscow. It doesn't matter if it's happening anywhere. If some group of people are being murdered, certainly with having their head sawed off, and somebody screaming Allahu Akbar. And of course, the shameful example that disproves the case is American mass shootings, which they don't scream Allahu Akbar, which is an entirely different subject, which I would like to get to someday very soon. But in any event, when you hear that somebody was randomly stabbed at the mall, or you hear that there's been an explosion in what was the town? Was it Nice, south of France, where the guy plowed through with a truck? Your first instinct is to think, I'll bet it's Muslims, and you've been told to be ashamed of it, and so on. This is a piece of fine, higher grade thinking. It's the opposite of sophistry. It's the opposite of me arguing what the definition of is. So listen carefully, please. I can say that if there's a terror attack in the country, I would naturally think that it was Muslims, because there's overwhelming evidence that most of these type of attacks historically have been Muslim. It doesn't mean that it has to be a Muslim, and it doesn't mean that every Muslim is guilty of it, but it does mean that if you live in a world where terror attacks are being conducted virtually exclusively by Muslims, if I see the sign of what looks like a terror attack, and I think Muslim, that's not prejudice. That's not racism. It's nothing. It's just using your brain. It's just the kind of things that we deal with every day in the world. The black crime rate in this country is enormous. The black murder rates in black neighborhoods are 50, 60,000, 50,000. Let's say 50 people per 100,000. 50 people per 100,000 in Detroit, round numbers. In Plano, Texas, it's half a person per 100,000. 50 people per 100,000 in Detroit, 1 person in 200,000 in Plano, Texas. It's 100 to 1, virtually. And that's not prejudice, and that's not racism. That is the reality of the world as it exists. And if 13% of the population commits 65% of the violent crimes, then I didn't cause that. And for me to pretend that's not true is lunacy. But this is where we get to the core of the issue. But that doesn't give me the right to say that black person who I don't know is a criminal, because that's just wrong. It's morally wrong. It's a fine line, but you can walk it, and you can walk it with integrity and honor. You can say, look, I understand that we're generalizing about a group. And I understand that when you generalize about a group, you do harm to people in that group who are not guilty of whatever you're accusing them of. I understand that. But at the same time, see, I can keep two thoughts in my head at the same time. At the same time, I can recognize patterns when I see them, right? I mean, you can recognize a pattern. It's pretty clear. So yes, of course, it's a kind of a moral dilemma. But I'm not going to be demonized for saying what seems to me to be obvious if it turns out that a religion that commands its adherents to murder everybody else, not just some people, but everybody who's not them, go out and kill them. If that's what it says in their religious book, I'm not going to be surprised if it turns out that people doing a lot of killing are of that Islamic persuasion. And again, we deal with moral issues here. I try to anyway. I try to do moral issues, and I try to live a moral life. And so I ask myself, what about all of the innocent Muslims who really have nothing to do with this, who are good tax-paying American citizens and family people and all the rest of it? What about them? What did they do to deserve this enormously rapidly growing anti-Muslim attitude in this country, which is reasonable? It's reasonable to have an attitude against a group or any kind of immigrants of any color if their entire philosophy of life is the absolute antithesis of everything we believe in. That's not prejudice. That's absolutely reasonable. But what about the innocent Muslims? What did they do? And I think that the answer to that is this: is that they didn't stand up. They did not have the courage, or secretly agreed with these people. And instead of saying, well, it's not fair to blame all Muslims, none of them have stood up and said, we're Americans first. We love this country, and where are they? Why are they not turning these people in? If these Muslims in America have all these terror networks and all these mosques are preaching all this stuff, how come perfectly good, decent Muslims aren't saying, well, there's this meeting here going on that you might want to look at? And I thought for a long time it was moral cowardice on the part of the American Muslims, but it's not. It's also survival on their part, because if they make that call and it's found out, then these Muslims will kill them. They will kill them first because they've betrayed their religion. So what it really comes down to is the reason that American Muslims are not demonstrating, and the reason against ISIS and terror, and the reason they're not turning them in, is because they have no confidence that by doing so, we are serious. If the President of the United States is on the side of ISIS and constantly talks about how wonderful Islam is, why should they take that risk? Why? Who's going to defend them? The government? Government's telling you, no, you're imagining the whole thing. It's not fair to say that all of these terrorist bombings where everybody's screaming Allahu Akbar have anything to do with Islam. So why would they stand up? If the President of the United States doesn't have the moral clarity to say it, then why should they? It's a perfectly reasonable argument. Why should they stand up and say that as a Muslim I find this appalling, awful, disgraceful, and just awful, and I'd like to apologize? Why don't they say it? Well, they don't say it because the President of the United States tells them it's not Islam. No, this is not. No. Islam is a part of, and on and on and on and on and on. This man is such a catastrophe. It's just such a catastrophe. And after 8 years of catastrophe, what has he got to show for it? The world is in much worse shape internationally in terms of our foreign relations. The economy's been about to recover for 8 years now. What is his signature legislation? Obamacare. It's falling apart. They're going out of business. It's literally falling apart. We didn't have to banish it. We spent how many years did we spend in the Tea Party trying to get Obamacare repealed? We didn't have to get it repealed. Turns out that we didn't have to get it repealed because we said it doesn't make any sense economically, and it doesn't make any sense economically, so we don't have to repeal it because it's destroying, it's collapsing under the weight of reality. This guy, when it's all over, is going to look back, and what's going to be his legacy? What will he point to? Was there any legislation? No. Did he win a world war or something for us? No. A Cold War? No. Did he make us stronger? No. What did he do? Well, the one thing he did more than anything that should damn him throughout the rest of history is he took a country that was very nearly a colorblind society, very nearly out of the woods, and in order to gain political power for himself and his party, basically invented this Black Lives Matter argument that black people are being assassinated in large numbers by policemen and white people on the streets of America. He did it intentionally. He's reopened the oldest and deepest wound that we have in this country, and he's done it for his own political gain and for that of his party. That's going to send him to hell as far as I'm concerned, because that's not innocent. That's not a mistake. That's a strategy. Gin up a race war among American citizens, because if we don't get 90% of the black vote, then we lose. That's a definition of evil to me, the definition of it. Anyway, so yeah, look, you cannot. I remember one other thing I wanted to say about this. I haven't talked about this in quite a long time. So somebody gets stabbed in a mall. You live in Minnesota, where there are large numbers of Somali immigrants, and your first thought is, I'll bet it was a Somali. And it turns out it was. And therefore, should I feel guilty about all this? I'm not a real super expert at this, but that doesn't mean I won't talk about it like I am for a while. But this is something I haven't talked about in a long time, and it's really, really interesting. And it's got to do with heuristics. In 2001, back on my wall back there, the HAL 9000 computer was a heuristically programmed, I want to say analog computer. So what's a heuristic? Well, heuristics, as I understand it, is simple and fascinating. Heuristics means that you don't have to learn everything every single time. That once you learn something, that is a building block that you can consider to be standard. My God, listen, somebody's burglar moving. There's a burglar moving right behind me. I guess he's got all our hard drives, and he certainly has our technical skill, that's for sure, because God knows we can't get a show on the air without having a mic fail. But back to heuristics. So a heuristic is a building block, and the simpler the heuristic is, the more reliable it is. So if you see something that's glowing red on a countertop and you touch it and you burn yourself, you've touched a hot stove, and you won't do that again. You don't have to keep touching the stove to find out that glowing red things burn. You don't have to, every time you see something hot, every time you see fire someplace, any place, you don't have to stick your hand in it every single time to know that it's hot and it's going to burn you, because once you learn it once, it's there. And so heuristics are these beliefs and understandings and rules and laws that you can think of as a series of bricks, and we build our worldview out of these heuristics, out of these lessons. And to some degree, they're an assumption. They are an assumption. You know, if you see a red hot thing, you burn your hand. You go someplace and red hot thing, it's almost certainly going to be a glowing hot piece of metal or something, but maybe not. But most of the time, it works great. So the more simple your heuristics is, like glowing red burn, that's a simple heuristic that's going to do you well. When you get up into higher level heuristics, Democrats are traitors, that's not reliable. You can get there, but it's not reliable. So the question is, when we start asking ourselves about how we get into these situations and what's fair and what's not fair, is what heuristics, what building blocks, little building blocks of truth have we inserted into our philosophy that work most of the time, and sometimes they work virtually all of the time, but not necessarily all the time. And somewhere along here, we have seen enough heuristically programmed algorithm computer, anyway, whatever. We have seen enough evidence to convince us that Muslims are at war with the West. We've seen enough evidence. I watched it on TV. I watched these guys fly jet airplanes full of people into buildings. I watched it on TV. I didn't have to be convinced about it, and I didn't have to have anybody explain it to me. I knew exactly what was going on, and I know, and you know, we both know, all of us know, that on the 4 jets that were hijacked that day, we know what the last words spoken on all 4 of those jets were before those people were atomized. We know. We know what the last 2 words were on every single one of those 4 jets, don't we? We know what they are. And if you don't see that, there's something wrong with you. If you can't see that, if you cannot see that the exact last instant before those 2 jets went into the World Trade Center, before that 1 jet went into the Pentagon, and before that other jet was forced into a field by the heroes on board, if you don't understand that the last 2 words that existed among all of those lies were Allahu Akbar, if you don't understand that, then there's something wrong with you. There's something wrong with you. You're missing something. You're trying to show people you're so noble and so good by denying obvious reality. That's not virtue. That's mental illness. You need some help. You need some psychiatric help. So when we see things like 9/11, it becomes a lesson. It becomes a heuristic, which is started out for us. Look, We didn't pay much attention to Muslims because Americans, frankly, don't pay much attention to anything that's not going on in America. We don't care. I told you about that classic argument I got into with this German guy. This is before I started doing what I was doing. There was a flame war in a chat group, and this German guy was for an hour and a half talking about how awful Americans are, how fat they are, how stupid they are, how awful they are, blah 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 blah, on and on and on and on and on. And I finally said, well, you know what? We've been talking for an hour now about what you Germans think about Americans. You want to know what we Americans think about you Germans? And he said, yes. I said, we don't. We don't think about you. We don't think about you at all. We don't know who your movie stars are. We don't know who your music is. We don't wear your T-shirts. We don't care. And that's devastating. And I saw what I saw. And you saw what you saw. And to pretend that didn't happen is to deny reality. I never forget the images of those people falling, of the people falling down the World Trade Center, which I think I pointed out in that post I did on 9/11 last week. The pictures of the people falling from the World Trade Center it's almost like it's laid out by a graphic designer, because the vertical lines of the structure of the World Trade Center almost look like the kind of thing that a graphic designer would put in there to accentuate the distance and the acceleration, the velocity, all of it. It's just the image is so, well, I'm just going to use the word, it's such a perfect image. Falling man, the one person who they've got that relative close-up on, who's going down head first and seems completely at ease. He just looks like he's like walking in the park. They did a great documentary on Falling Man. I found out who that guy was, by the way. But you see that picture, and that's all you need to know about that day, right? That's all you need to know about that day. The explosions are spectacular, and they're very eye-catching, and all the orange fireballs and all the debris and all of that. But that's not what happened that day. What happened that day is that man falling through the air head first with these vertical lines, and it looks like somebody put it together in Photoshop, and you paid a lot of money for it. It's an image that is virtually perfect, because that image captures the horror of 9/11 more than anything else. The reason that 9/11 was so appalling in New York City, especially, in fact, exclusively, because this doesn't apply to the people in Shanksville, I don't think, quite as much, or the Pentagon. Yes, the people on board the planes knew they were in trouble. Yes, they knew they were going to die. Well, ones on the first one didn't know they were going to die. In fact, the only people who knew they were going to die were on Flight 93, and that's why Flight 93 didn't hit their targets. If everybody on those 4 airplanes knew what was going to happen to them, none of them would have hit their targets. American citizens would have done the same thing to those other 3 that they did on Flight 93. They would have gotten in there and broken up the door, and they would have tried to get this guys out and then put the plane on the ground or save it, one or the other. In any event, the horror of 9/11 is that, well, people were killed during the explosions. No question that people were killed during the explosions, large numbers of people. The people below the explosions more or less got out. And the horror of 9/11 is the fact that the people above the explosions were alive for 40 minutes at least, almost an hour in the case of the North Tower, that they had plenty of time to think about what was happening and that they were going to die. They knew they were going to die. And that's what's horrible about it. It's what's horrible about it is if you don't have enough imagination to be able to see that this wall that used to be there is now a giant gaping hole. You ever been to the top of the Empire State Building or top of a really tall building and understood how windy it is up there? And both of those towers form a venturi, so the air is being accelerated between those 2 buildings. You've got a solid wall that you've leaned against, that you've got your coffee pot against, and you got your pictures of your family, and that wall's just not there anymore. You ever look over out the window of a tall building or lean over a railing on a tall building and get that sense of falling? Well, there's no railing there and there's no window there. There's just a hole there, and wind is blowing past. And you see these people at the edge of these windows? Think about that. There's no handrail. There's no safety net. There's no ropes. There's nothing. I'm standing at a hole, and I am 80 stories above the ground, and there's this gaping hole in front of me and fires behind me and people screaming, and for 45 minutes I have to sit there and decide, now what do I do? So, yeah, I didn't forget that, and I'm not going to forget it. And I don't care what people say about me. You can't convince me that didn't happen. And you can't convince me that the Germans didn't kill 6 million Jews and 6 million other people, including other Germans, in the death camps in World War II. You don't. I won't be convinced of that because it happened. It's not up for discussion. It happened. So if you can't get your mind around it, that's your problem. But it happened, and I'm not going to let those people who were murdered, either in any of those situations, be forgotten by trying to exonerate their murderers and say that it's a religion of peace. It's not a religion of peace. It's not. There are many peaceful Muslims, but they're apostates. I think it's the last one. Yes. Good. Yes, I think. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, last one. It's from Day Stanko, I think. German name, I believe. Eddie writes, my family lives in Germany, where local government is seen as one of the highest callings. In my experience, Americans tend to only care about government on two levels, county and federal. I've yet to meet someone whose dream is to be a city councilman, but I have met many folks who want nothing more than to work in the Beltway. With America as the birthplace of institutionalized bottom-up governance, is this obsession with federal over local politics just a sign of the times? What are your thoughts? That's a profoundly good question there, Day. The reason that becoming an official of some kind in Germany is looked up to, because bureaucrats are looked up to, and bureaucrats are looked up. The word, I remember during the Iraq invasion, somewhere in 2003 or 4, it was a statistic published that something like 70% of all the French people thought that bureaucrat was a compliment. That to be a bureaucrat was something to be looked up to. Americans are like, what? And so the first thing in terms of understanding this difference is you have to understand the founding nature of the United States. Germany is a great example, by the way. So Germany, I don't have to tell you this, was composed of scores, maybe even 100 or more little duchies and free towns and little kingdoms of this and little kingdoms of that, and this little giant patchwork quilt. Prussia's a big one, Bavaria's a pretty big one, and then you've got things that are literally a town, just a one town. It's its own government, it's not part of another, it's its own country. And so in Germany, when Bismarck pulls all these things together and he creates a unified Germany, and how does the average German know that it's a unified Germany and not still a collection of 50, 60 different principalities? Well, it's because the flag comes down, right? The principality flag comes down, and the German flag goes up, and that flag represents the German Reich, and Bismarck, and all of that. And so if you live in a society like that, it's the government that brings order to things. It's the government that pushes away starvation and warfare, and it's the government that basically restores order and gives you a sense of security and a sense of stability, all of that. And in Europe, you're coming out of feudalism. I mean, you can go back before the Middle Ages, but it doesn't make any sense really, because modern Western culture the Middle Ages changed everything so much that going back to the Middle Ages, before the Middle Ages, doesn't really matter. But in any event, what are you dealing with? You're dealing with authoritarian structures, both of two kinds. In all of Europe, you're dealing with the secular authoritarian structures, which might be your local baron, or your local count, or your local duke, or your local earl, or whatever. And if you've got a pretty decent beat, maybe your local duke of Earl. But you've got all of these warring factions, and at the same time, you have an extremely powerful church. They didn't call it the Catholic Church then because there was nothing to compare Catholic Church against. It was just the church. It was the church. They owned everything. They when I say they owned everything, they owned the thought cycles. And the church and the dukes and the barons had a deal, and the deal was the secular people, the warriors, Henry V and those kind of guys said, all right, we'll grant you all kinds of land to the church, and we'll grant you a great deal of riches, and you'll be able to levy something that looks like taxes, and we won't tax you, and you'll become fabulously wealthy, and you can set up all these monasteries and cathedrals and all the rest of this stuff. We'll help you build all of that. And in exchange for that, we only want one thing, really. And what we want is we want you to tell people that it's God's will that we're in power. That's all we want in exchange. We're going to give you all of this gilded gold and everything. We're going to give you all of this stuff, forever, for centuries and centuries and centuries. And all we ask from the clergy in response is, we need them to tell the common people that it's God's will that I am the king. God's will. It's the divine right of kings. Because if you got that, then the peasants are not nearly so likely to revolt. They're not just revolting against, Prince Bill here. They're revolting against God. It's heresy. It's blasphemy. You're going to go to hell for eternity if you decide to revolt against me. That's why I preferentially would like to see all peasants just essentially put down, because they're very unruly, and the next thing you know, if you don't rule them with an iron fist, they'll start getting uppity. So all of this stuff leads to a strong central state in Europe. And what I just said is really kind of important, because if you do rule people with an iron hand, there are some people who will get uppity. There are some people that don't like being ruled, and there's some people who don't like the fact that I'm working from before sunrise till after sunset, and I'm growing these miserable little potatoes, and I've got this scrawny chicken, and I have to go walk in front of this lord, and I have to place at his disposal, half of the work I do or 3/4 of the work I do, and then on top of it, if he decides to go to war over somebody because he likes his wife, I'm expected to pick up a halberd or something, or an axe, and go and fight in his wars for personal glory and gain, which does nothing for me except maybe keep out bandits. That's a pretty poor deal. And so when you finally have this new world come along, this is a whole world. This is so important. The new world was populated by Indians, but they had no government. There was no civilization here. There was a civilization in South America and in Central America, the Aztecs and the Mayans and the Incas. But in North America, there's nothing. These nomadic tribes, which meant essentially no government. And for the first time in human history, you had this open park that nobody lives in. So who's going to go and live in this park? Well, it's going to be the uppity people who don't like being told what to do. Because if you've got 100 peasants and everyone hates being a peasant, and everybody hates giving all of this stuff to the czar or the priest or the emir or the shah or the whatever, and you've got 100 people that hate it, because they all hated it. No one was in favor of it. And what is the right to senior, the fact that your local noble had the right to sleep with your bride. Your local noble had the right to have the first shot at your virgin bride. That's because it's good to be the king. So nobody likes this, and everybody hates it. And the question is, what happens throughout centuries and centuries of people hating it? Most people are afraid, and most people put up with it, because even though it's awful, you're at least alive. But some people decide that we'd rather make the kind of risk that may cost us our lives, but in exchange for that risk, we might get our freedom. And those people got on boats. And then they got on airplanes, and they came here. And the reason they came here is because there was nobody else here. They got to build it from scratch. They got to build it from nothing. It was a blank sheet of paper, and it didn't have anything on it, and they got to just start with a blank sheet of paper. But this country was created by people who ran away from governments, not out of cowardice. They understood that, look, we can start a peasant uprising here, and I'll just simply be burned at the stake, and nothing's going to change. So let's go someplace we've never been before, start a new group. And so when you understand, Day, that not just the founding fathers of America, but up until like right now, there are people getting off of airplanes to start a new life here because they couldn't take it back home. I was in New York not too long ago. I was on one of these pedal cabs, and I met a young man, 20-year-old guy, and he just cornered me, just wouldn't let me go. I said, all right, I was going to walk back to the hotel, so I get in the back of this cab with this guy, and he's pedaling along, and he says, my name is Omar, I think. Where are you from? I'm from Kazakhstan. No, that's awesome, dude. He's working hard. These are big, heavy taxi cabs, and they're pedal things, and I'm in the back, and he's working us through rain, and he's really working hard. And I said, so how'd you get here? He says, we just got on a plane and came here, and this is the land of dreams, and I'm 22, and my whole life is in front of me, and I'm going to work really hard, and I'm going to find a way to do it. And look, I know he was violating his tourist visa. I understand that. And I understand that he's an illegal alien. I'm against illegal immigration. But he was here for the same reason that the people who traditionally come here have come here, which is, I'm not satisfied at home, and I think if I work hard enough, I can then lead a better life. So he got on a plane, It's not like he got on his plane to visit the relatives in the mansion that they have here in New York. He got on a plane. He doesn't know what the hell New York is going to look like. He doesn't know what anything about it. Doesn't know what John F. Kennedy terminal is going to look like. He doesn't know how he's going to get from the airport to wherever the hell he's going to live. He doesn't know where he's going to live. Doesn't know what he's going to do. But he could not stand the fact that he was staying there and watching the only life he had rot away because of the inaction and the cruelty and the ignorance of the world he grew up in. He decided to do something about it. I admire people like that very much. And if we could exchange every one of those guys for a Berkeley professor, we'd be in fine shape very soon. And that's the whole country, Dave. The whole country is built upon people who made that decision at one point or another. For me, that decision wasn't made by me, and it wasn't made by my father. It was made by my father's father, my grandfather, Joseph Whittle, sorry, who came here as a family of 7 in 1915. I want to say? No, it was 1911. Came in 1911, and 4 or 5 of the kids came, and then they set up an advanced base camp, and they went through Ellis Island, and then the rest of the family came over once they found a tiny little house for them all to live in. So at some point, all of us here in this country, all of us, are the result of people who just took a chance. And it turns out there is a risk-taking gene, and somebody I knew used to be able to tell me it was expressed on a certain allele or whatever. I really knew what they were doing. But there is, in fact, a gene that codes for risk-taking. And I bet you anything, if you took a sample of the American population, you would find that gene far predominant here than anywhere else in the world. But I also think you'd find that gene is not nearly as prevalent now as it was 50 years ago. And the reason that I say that is because we are no longer first, second generation immigrants, and we're no longer running from tyranny, or we're no longer running from economic poverty. We now are a country that's gone, 60, 70 years without a major war, with the exception of 9/11, which is a one-off attack. We've never had our cities bombed and stuff, and we've never known any hardship. And the kids who are raised today, if you're a teenager today, you've had 24-hour air conditioning. The temperature's been exactly what you determined it to be. You've never been cold and you've never been hot. You've never been hungry, not for a minute in your life. If you're a modern American millennial, you have never been hungry a day in your life. And when you come home and say, I'm starving, that means you're mildly peckish compared to real hunger. And you've never been in serious pain. And certainly if you are in serious pain, you're going to be in serious pain for an hour at the most, maybe, until they get you to the hospital and knock you out and fix your broken bones or whatever. And so when you start from that, high, where do you go? When my ancestors came over here, my grandfather's not exactly my ancestor, but when they came over here, electricity was still a pretty new deal, and so was running water. So if you worked very hard all your life and you had to light smoky little candles or little oil lamps, and suddenly you could come home and go, ta-da, and it's like daylight in there. That is an earth-shaking improvement in your life, and it's an incentive to work harder. But why should kids born today work harder? They have everything. They don't. There's nothing for them to work for, and there's certainly nothing for them to risk their lives for. So they take all of it for granted, and like every other civilization, it rots from the head down. The elites put their kids in special schools, and the elites are by definition driving around in limousines, and they don't have to deal with problems of milk being too expensive, and the elites don't have to deal with issues of how are we going to make ends meet, or college costs too much money. They don't deal with any of that. They're just set for life, and their kids are set for life, and every generation they get worse, and they're in charge. And the one thing I'm going to close this show on, I try to close on it every time I can, this is the cycle of civilization. It's 100, 200, 300 years maybe of slow growth, of hard work, of patriotism, heroism, fighting off enemy tribes, trying to win economic benefits, and slowly, Babylon becomes dominant, or Egypt becomes dominant, or Greece becomes dominant, or Rome becomes dominant, or Spain becomes dominant, or France becomes dominant, or Britain becomes dominant, and there's a bunch of other examples too. Very, 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 very slow climb, and then when they're at the peak of their powers, when they dominate the world, and there's nothing else that could be considered their competitors, when you would think that after all of this struggle, now that they are the most powerful nation in the world, militarily, culturally, politically, economically, you would think that at that point then they'd go up into orbit. The thing, now we don't have any competition. We're out of here. That's not what happens. It just collapses overnight. Collapses overnight because there's too much comfort and there's too much security, and you take everything for granted. You ask these millennials about freedom and capitalism, and they'll tell you capitalism is horrible and unfair, and they'll tell you that the First Amendment right to free speech is an abomination because it hurts people's feelings. And the reason they do that is because they've never had to live under socialism, and they've never had to have their lives treated like a little cog in a machine, have to stand in line for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours to get into a store that may not have anything in it, and they've never had to they've never been enslaved. They've never been forced. They've never had to do anything they didn't want to do. Honestly, the worst slavery that modern Americans have known is that you had to go clean your room, or else you didn't get the car for the night. That's it. That's pretty much it. That's the hardship of slavery that we're creating. So, when you have people that soft, it's prime for collapse. And this is the way I'd like to close the show, and I'd like to close it every way I can, as often as I can by this. So, there's no question that America is in the end stages of civilization. There's no question about it whatsoever. All of the signs are there. All of the moral signs are there. The moral decay is there. All of it's there. And frankly, if it weren't for one thing, I'd just be stocking up on beans and ammo and just go live in the woods. And when it's over, it's Walking Dead. I mean, 9/10 of the country dies of starvation, and whoever's left is left, and all the rest of that. And then you have to wait 500 years, 1,000 years before you have civilization again. By the way, all of those ores that were easy to find and the oil that was just under the ground, that's all gone now. So if you're going to try and build this thing from scratch again, you're not going to have much luck. So why am I not just filled with despair over this? Well, I'm not filled with despair over this because of the Stratosphere Lounge. Because the Stratosphere Lounge is I'm not saying it is going to save America, but it might save America. And what I mean by that is, all of the signs occur in America are the fact that the elites have nothing to do with the common people anymore. They will not even tell them if they're mortally ill. They will not tell the citizens of their own country that I've got a very serious sickness, because they think that we don't deserve to know, because we're not citizens anymore. We're subjects, and our job is to go make money so they can spend it. And this is how every civilization has ever fallen. But the difference this time is the Stratosphere Lounge. And what I mean by that is, it's the first time in the history of the world, ever in the history of civilization, that common people can talk to other common people. That's it. That's all. That's all the internet is. It's a chance for common people to talk to other common people without having to go through the corrupted, bored, suicidal elites. And a perfect example of this is the Hillary picture, the video on 9/11 in the morning. And the reason it's a perfect picture is this: CNN didn't cover that. CNN didn't get the photograph, didn't get the video. And if they had gotten the video, they would never have aired it. They would have buried it, because they're elitist and they have a death wish and they don't like the society and they want to die. It's really that simple. It's why they defend Islam all the time. They want to die. So if it hadn't been for the internet, if you look at the Hillary Clinton moment where she stumbles and collapses, if you look at that as something that has happened all throughout history with various leaders, this is the first time in history ever where common people were there and took pictures of it and sent it to other common people, because that vision, that photographic evidence of the lie didn't have to go through the elite, because if it had, we never would have seen it. You and I would have never seen this footage ever. We would never have seen any of the footage of Hillary coughing. We never would have seen any of the footage of her rolling her eyes at the DNC, or we certainly would have seen it more than once. They don't show the 9/11 footage anymore. They don't want us to get all excited, and they just don't want us to realize what the world is. So, but we did see it, didn't we? We saw it. And as Joe Baseball says, the signal will get out. And I think that's from Firefly Serenity, I'm not sure. But yes, this is the first time ever that this has happened. A regular person with their telephone, 2 of them, just happened to be in the street at the right moment at the right time, and the Democratic candidate for the United States of America cannot stand on her feet, and she's wobbly, and she collapses into this vehicle, and we'd never know about it if it weren't for a regular citizen shooting the picture and sending it up to the internet, where guys like me chew on it and spit it out and make sense out of it, and it goes out to more people on the internet. And I'm not saying that's going to save us, but I'm saying it's different. It's never happened before. You never had that in Rome. You never had that in Greece or Babylon or even the British Empire. If a common citizen saw Caesar fall drunk someplace or whatever, how's he going to tell the rest of the Romans what he saw? You can't do it. It's impossible. There's no technology for it. That gives me a lot of hope, and it's why I stay in business. And again, I'd just like to thank the members, the paying members at BillWhittle.com, because they're parting with money in order to keep this civilization alive. It took me a long time to come to grips with this. It took me a long time to stop feeling bad about asking for support and money, because I was raised not to hold out a hat. But this is going to save the world, or it's not, and nothing else will. So if you want to be a part of that, we'd love to have you. Over at BillWhittle.com, you just click on Become a Member, and you can be part of the team that's not only going to save this country, we're going to get us out of this cycle of history, because power corrupts people, and enough power concentrated over a long enough time leads the people to become so corrupt that they go down and they take everybody down with them. And now we don't have to do that, because we have the Stratosphere Lounge and 1,000 million other outlets. So let's keep the doors open. We're the news media now, not them. CNN's not the news media. They suppress the news. This is the news. You're getting the news right now. And it's a worthy cause. It's the worthy cause. It's the most worthy cause in the world. I'm honored and proud to be a part of it. And I owe all of that to those of you out there who've been fans and watching these videos over the years. And every single view I'm grateful for, and all the kind words, especially in the emails and the Facebook thing, all of that. It means the world to me. But especially the people that have decided to put their money where their mouth is. They put resources that they could have spent on coffee or something and put it here because they think it works. I think it works too. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up episode 130 of the Stratosphere Lounge. Running time is just over 2 hours. How about that? 2 hours and 10 minutes. I think that includes probably 15 minutes of me trying to get the mic working at the beginning, but in any event, it's 2 hours. So time to go home. New firewall coming out this week, or certainly early next week, about the healthcare thing, the evidence that she's very ill and that it's being covered up. And then after that, another one about watching elected officials squirm because they cannot tell the truth, because the system has become so awfully screwed up that the chief law enforcement officer of the greatest country in the history of the world cannot simply say that if you're doing 65 in a 55 zone, you've broken the law. Won't say it. Can't say it. So that's how serious things are. And I think if it were me, I'd put all my money on the table here. I'd certainly put my life on it. And one last thing I'll leave you with as part of the pitch is this. I've gone and done fundraisers for wounded soldiers, for Veterans Airlift Command, and for housing and transportation for wounded soldiers. And I get to spend a fair amount of most of a day and a half with them. And some of these guys one of these guys is a quadruple amputee. Both his arms, both his legs are gone. And I'd do anything for those guys. So when I deal with those guys, and I'm dealing with rich investors or potential donors in a swanky event down in Orange County, I pull out the big guns. And the big guns are this. We know that these people either died or they left their arms or legs or eyesight or hearing or their sanity overseas, keeping us free so we didn't have to worry about getting mortared on the way to school in the morning, or our wife getting picked off by a sniper out in back of the grocery store. So they've already paid for this. They paid for it in advance. And the thing I say to people is, I say to them this. I say, what is this worth to you? And the only way I can get a handle on what it would be worth to me is, what would you pay for it if it was gone? If it was gone, what would you pay for it? If it turned out that secret police could come and arrest you at the end of the night because they didn't like the way you voted, take you out at 2 o'clock in the morning, ask you a couple questions, beat you up a little bit, make you sign a denunciation, take you out back and shoot you. And then your kids are going to get, they're going to have to crawl through rubble to get to school in the morning, and there's no economy, and people just, if you want to get out of a law, laws are set up to take bribes. If it all went to hell and turned into the third world, what would you pay to get it back? You'd give everything. You'd give everything to get it back. You'd give it all. I'm not asking for all of it, but we're fighting for freedom here, and we're fighting for freedom. That's all we're fighting for, and that's all that matters in the world. And we're dying, paradoxically, of too much freedom. We're dying of an overdose of freedom. It's like an overdose of oxygen. We have an overdose of freedom, and nobody appreciates what it is anymore. Nobody's telling them what it is anymore. Nobody's showing them what it is anymore. But I am, and other people are. And even Andrew Klavan said, isn't this worth your measly $8, $8, I think. And as I said on the Right Angle conference call, if Andrew Klavan is getting $8 for a membership, then we need to raise our rates significantly, because that's Andrew Klavan stuff is dreck. It's just garbage, it's barely intelligible, kind of thing that chimpanzees would put out. He's not a good man, not at all. That'll do it. I'm done rambling. So thanks very much for being part of episode 130, which was once renamed 129. I can't even count anymore. I get above 20 and I'm in trouble. But thanks for watching. Sorry I had to ditch it last week. As I'm sure you know by now, this show is something I enjoy doing and I like doing very much. But when the pressures of either travel or the big guns, firewalls or whatever, come along, then sometimes I have to sacrifice Stratosphere Lounge, and I'm always very grateful for your patience in that regard too. So that'll do it, and we will see you hopefully next Wednesday. I think there's a good chance I'll be here. Don't have anything planned. Presumably by next Wednesday, the Democratic candidate for president of the United States will still be vertical on some level, and there won't be any shortage of news for a while. And with that, I'll say goodnight, and thanks for being part of the news team. And your nightly news will be back in 7 days, so stay tuned.